Chapter 421. He was abandoned by his parents as soon as he was born. Looking at Aisha Smith in front of him, Iger shook his head slightly. Aisha was only 18 years old. She didn't look like she could give birth to a child at the age of 10. The beauty in front of him had been very nice to him. She even came to the orphanage from time to time, hoping to adopt him. Unfortunately, the old principal thought Aisha had ulterior motives and was afraid she would sell Edgar. In fact, single people were not allowed to adopt children, so Aisha never succeeded. Just take it. It's the deposit for you to be my little lover in the future. Aisha smiled and got up to leave. Edgar was a little embarrassed. He had been lying in bed for 20 years in his previous life. He was still a virgin when he died. He had never been in a relationship before. If Aisha could wait for him to grow up, he wouldn't mind having a relationship with a younger man. Edgar's face was a little red. He had a lot of thoughts. Speaking of which, Aisha was really pretty. In the distance, a large group of children was running on the street. The boy in the lead looked at Edgar and waved his hand excitedly. "How's business today, Edgar?" The boy had freckles on his face and brown hair. He wasn't very good-looking, but he looked very obedient. "Not bad." Edgar tilted his head. "What a pity. If you had parents like us, you might be able to go to school." The boy looked at Edgar sincerely. Edgar clenched his teeth. "If you really don't know how to comfort people, I suggest you don't try to comfort them. Otherwise, you'll get beaten up." The boy shuddered and stepped back, muttering softly, "You can't do this." As a wild child in the orphanage, Edgar's physical strength was obviously better than the spoiled children in front of him. Edgar was glad he had a good body in this life. Even putting aside his physical strength, Iger always felt that there was another kind of power hidden in his body. On a few occasions, some strange things happened around Edgar, which made him think that he was schizophrenic. A drop of rain fell through the thick clouds and landed on Edgar's head. Edgar shook his head helplessly. He opened his umbrella and put away his stall. "Damn the weather. The showers in London are terrible," Edgar mumbled as he kept the items into a small box. He folded 2 small stools and walked towards the alley. The alleyway was full of twists and turns. Edgar walked briskly through the alleyway. After a while, a dilapidated orphanage appeared in his sight. This was the orphanage where Edgar was raised. There was a fierce old woman in the orphanage, a kind sister nun, and a few unwanted children. Edgar had heard a few days before that the orphanage was going to close down. The remaining orphans were going to be sent to other orphanages in London, and the little yard near the center of the city was going to be used for other projects. "Sister Linda, I'm back. Dear, did you miss me?" Edgar pushed the door open and walked into the room. The old room was very quiet. In fact, if you can obediently get out of the orphanage and go to the home of the woman who covets your beauty, I will be very happy. I will immediately help you with the procedures. A fierce voice came from behind. Edgar turned around with a smile, and an old face appeared in front of him. "Grandma Coke's menopause has been delayed again?" Edgar put the shoeshine beside the door. "Where is Sister Linda?" "Humph, you little bastard. No wonder they don't want to adopt you." Coke's old woman snorted and bent her back, signaling Edgar to help her up. "Linda took the children to buy school supplies. You know, although you are very smart and finished the primary school curriculum by yourself, it doesn't mean the other children will be like you." Coke's old woman was helped to the old sofa in the room by Edgar. She sighed sadly. "The orphanage is out of money. We don't know when it will be merged with other orphanages. The children still need to pay for their school fees. I have £5 here." Edgar shrugged and took out a note. "Put away your little belongings. You should think about yourself first. The new orphanage obviously doesn't want to accept an 8-year-old like you who hasn't been adopted yet." Coke's old woman looked at Edgar angrily. "Why don't you just go with that little girl? Why do you stay here and compete with us old, weak, sick, and disabled people?" Iger smiled and said, "I can't earn what I eat. I have a small asset now. Coke's old woman sighed. She knew what Edgar was thinking. The boy in front of her wanted to repay her for raising him. In the past few years, he had been shining shoes, delivering newspapers, and cleaning cars to earn money. All the money he earned was spent on the orphanage. Edgar, you are a good boy. Coke's old woman turned her head, her eyes wet. You're not going to call me a poisonous egg anymore? Edgar was expressionless. Humph. Coke's old woman snorted and raised her chin childishly. I will adopt you until you are 11 at most. Once you are old enough to go to middle school, I will not hesitate to kick you out of the orphanage. I swear in the name of Coke Moriarty. Get ready, you little bastard. Edgar saluted solemnly. I, Lord Edgar Morithus, accept your challenge. Bring it on. The two of them looked at each other for a moment and laughed. After a while, Edgar's stomach growled. He squinted at Coke's old woman and pursed his lip. Why isn't Linda back yet? Edgar looked at the gloomy sky outside the window and stood up worriedly. I'll go out and have a look. Rainy days in London are not good. In any sense. Come back quickly. Coke's old woman glanced at Edgar from behind the newspaper. Edgar nodded and walked quickly out of the room and into the alley. The rain poured down in the alley. Curses could be heard in the distance. Edgar felt uneasy and quickened his pace. Don't talk nonsense with me. Give me the money now. In the midst of the curses, a man with a dagger in his hand glared fiercely at several figures in front of him. The nun in front of the man was frantically protecting the children. Under the man's fierce threat, the children trembled. No, you can't do this. We don't have any money left. I used all my money to buy books for the children. Linda's body was cold. Under the rain, the dagger in the man's hand looked even more terrifying. The fear did not last long. A small figure came running from the alley. A black shadow flashed in his hand. Edgar jumped high and hit the back of the man's head with a brick. The man staggered and fell to the ground. Edgar hurriedly threw the dagger in the man's hand far away. He looked at the people in front of him and sighed. Let's go. It's not safe here. Chapter 422. Linda nodded with relief and hurried away with the children. Edgar looked at the man on the ground and shook his head helplessly. London's public security wasn't very good, especially in this kind of winding alley surrounded by tall buildings. There were often a lot of homeless people or drunkards wandering around. God knows where they got the time from. In London of this era, as long as you were willing to work, you could earn a lot of money. Just as he turned to leave, Edgar's expression suddenly stiffened. He turned his head and saw that the man on the ground had reached out and grabbed his ankle. Kid, you're too nosy. The man's expression was fierce. He covered Edgar's mouth with one hand and grabbed his neck with the other. Edgar's face turned red. He kept kicking the man's chest with his slender legs. The man showed his yellow teeth and laughed. There was a flash of pleasure on his face. Edgar felt his head getting dizzier and dizzier. His eyes started to turn black. Edgar knew it was a case of severe hypoxia. A sense of crisis struck Edgar's heart. He didn't know when Edgar was surrounded by black smoke. The man panicked as he looked at the black smoke around Edgar. He wanted to let go of his hand but was entangled by the black smoke. The man suddenly panicked and screamed in fear. In the man's vision, Edgar was swallowed by the black smoke. The black smoke covered the sky and rushed towards him. Memory came from the human brain. Long ago in the 6th century BC, Parmenides proposed that memory was a mixture of light and dark matter. It existed in the mind. Some people could remember things when they were 3 years old. Some people could forget things when they were 6 or 7 years old. Some people's memory was sparse. They could occasionally recall memories from long ago. However, most of the time they were in a daze. Some people could even recall the events of their previous lives. Suji cried out in alarm. He suddenly sat up on the bed. His chest was trembling, as if something was about to burst out of it. He touched the corner of his mouth. There was no blood. He was relieved. It had been more than 10 years since he came to this world. Suji counted with his fingers. 10 fingers were not enough. He counted again. 14 years. A total of 14 years. The past flashed through his mind one by one. He rubbed his eyes hard. In the past, he would rather this world be a dream. There was always a chance that he would wake up from this dream. However, this was still a real world, and it had already been 14 years. The room wasn't very big. There was a bed and an old wardrobe. Near the window there was a stove, pots, bowls, ladles, and basins. A little further out was a small cubicle. That was the toilet and the exit. Behind the door was a colorful photo of an old man. The old man in the photo was in high spirits and had a bright smile on his face. A rectangular piece of wood was nailed to the bottom of the picture. A small incense burner and an urn were placed on it. Some ashes were left in the incense burner. A stick of incense burned slowly, giving off the smell of sandalwood. The old man has already been dead for 2 years. Suji stared at the old man's portrait, and his memories resurfaced. Last life, this life. It was not a good reincarnation technique. Suji did not know where his parents were when he was born. He was considered an abandoned baby. He grew up in a welfare home. When he grew up, these children were adopted by people who needed them. The old man's surname was Sujing. He was a retired soldier. Speaking of which, there was a trace of fate between him and Sujing. Back then, Sujing was just passing by the welfare home to visit an old friend. In the end, Suji, who was only 2 years old, clung onto Sujing's leg and refused to let go. Sujing, who was already in his 50s, thought about it and decided to adopt him. Anyway, he had no children. The government's pension was also enough to support him. He met the requirements for adoption. It was not a big problem to have another child. Suji naturally followed Sujing's surname. As a man, he walked straight. What he followed was Sujing's philosophy. The origin of Suji's name was not strange. The dilapidated house was Sujing's residence. Suji had been in this room for 12 years. It carried too many memories. Turning on the lights, the room suddenly brightened up. Looking at the alarm clock, it was 5:30 in the morning. In a while, the sky would be bright. Suji touched his chest. In the past, there seemed to be something protruding out of it. Now it was flat and smooth. It was his youthful and delicate body. There was not a trace of abnormality. His figure was slightly thin. His face was long and narrow. His eyebrows were like blades. Suji took the mirror. In the mirror, his eyes were spirited. They were not as bloodshot as before. However, he always felt that there was something more to him. He could not explain it. Not mentioning his previous self in his memory, it seemed that this reincarnation or transmigration with memories did not bring any benefits to Suji. The culture was different. The language was different. All his previous experiences did not seem to be useful. It was not even possible to be a genius child prodigy. Thinking back, when Luo Binwang was 7 years old, his singing of the goose shocked everyone. He was known as a prodigy. Suji also wanted to be a prodigy. He wanted to bring surprises to himself and the people around him. However, he could not even translate a simple ancient poem like Singing the Goose. Of course, this was if he did not count the first line of goose, goose, goose. After all, this part was very easy to translate. Thinking back, he had studied English for more than 10 years. He could easily translate the first line without flipping through Chindu. Of course, the second line would be stuck. It was the kind that was very stuck. The difference in the language, the flatness, the rhyme, and the meaning were completely different. Even if he could translate it, Singing the Goose would not be able to shine in this world. Suji racked his brains. However, he could not think of any special way to let his life take the path of a protagonist. Ordinary people, no matter where they were, would appear ordinary. Perhaps a stable life would be good. Being ordinary was the real thing. After regaining his memories at the age of 6, Su Ji held this thought. In order to avoid the old man's stick education, Su Ji's performance was commendable. At least, compared to other children his age, he was more obedient. Having the thoughts of an adult in his head naturally had some benefit. Of course, there were also some disadvantages. He was slower than other children in accepting new things. This made him a little annoyed, but there was nothing he could do. An adult's thoughts were complicated and not as pure as a child's. Many years had passed. He had begun to calm down and slowly learn everything about this world. Since he was here, he could only adapt. The old man, Su Jing, was Su Ji's only support. He was also the person closest to him in this world. Looking at the old man's smiling colored photo, Su Ji's heart was filled with sadness. When Su Jing passed away, he was 12 years old. When he came back from school and saw the old man's dry and cold body, his heart was like the old man's body, cold and lonely. From that day onwards, Su Ji had nightmares and coughed up blood. It was an illness. Even if he did not have money, he had to treat it. He went to the school doctor's office for a full body checkup, blood test, body X-ray, and CT scan. Everything confirmed that his body was normal. He could not be any healthier. Maybe the old man was too lonely down there and was calling me. Since he could not see what was wrong with him, Su Ji did not take it seriously. After living a lifetime, life and death became less important. If he could live, he would definitely live well. If death came one day, he would face it calmly. Living 2 lives was already hard work. What else could he be dissatisfied with? This was not some mythical world filled with countless gods, ghosts, and demons. Even on Earth in his previous life, those things only existed in myths and legends. Being reincarnated again was a gift from the heavens. He was just a small butterfly on the planet. He was gently fanned out of Earth and mysteriously came here. Perhaps he would not even cause a ripple and would disappear in the dust of history. Su Ji looked out the window. It was 6 o'clock. The sun was shining brightly. The sun was slowly rising in the sky. A new day had arrived. Many old men and women began to go out to exercise. Some were waving swords, some were holding stone lions, and some were twisting blue stones that were close to 50 kilograms. An old lady in a red dress pressed the button on the radio. A lively melody sounded and filled the air in the early morning mist. Everyone flipped and jumped in an orderly manner. Square dancing. Su Ji sighed. He looked under the bed. The old man liked to play with an alloy wrought iron rod when he was a square dancer. It was as thick as an arm, too. 3 meters long, and weighed 135 kilograms. It was lying quietly under the bed. Chapter 423. Leopold said proudly, "I'm Leopold, a second-year assassin from the 3rd class of the Swift class." Assassins were divided into 8 ranks. Common, flat, swift, wind, lightning, shadow, blink, and invincible. Based on speed and stealth ability, Leopold's swift class could only be considered average. There were plenty of such people on the continent, but he actually thought he was strong. Reynold didn't know if he was mocking or admiring him, but he said, "Not bad, not bad. Assassin Senior Leopold, you actually became an assassin with your body. How much talent, wisdom, and perseverance do you need? You're really our new idol and role model. Respect, respect." Flattery was also a profound skill. If one accidentally flattered the horse's foot, it could easily cause the opposite effect. Being fat was originally Fatty's sore spot, but Reynolds had only vaguely mentioned it. Instead, he emphasized Fatty's achievements. In this way, Fatty's shortcomings were not highlighted. Instead, it highlighted his perseverance, talent, and other positive things. In fact, Fatty had indeed put in a lot of hard work. Leopold couldn't help but smile when he heard Reynold praise him in front of Doris. He was so happy that he didn't even know where he was. He couldn't help but want Reynold to say a few more words. He thought to himself, "This commoner is more tactful, unlike the other 2. Erin looked at her roommate's abnormal behavior. He didn't help his own people, but instead flattered Leopold. She didn't know why, but she soon got her answer. Reynolds continued, I imagine that someone as strong as Senior must be very broad-minded, someone who can hold a boat in his stomach. Leopold was enjoying the flattery. He said casually, Of course. Reynolds smiled and said, Then I think Senior won't be so calculative with people like us who are weaker than you. Isn't such a small matter like this a sesame seed in the eyes of someone as magnanimous as you? Leopold was stunned. He had obviously fallen into Reynolds' trap, but then he thought about it. He had already shown off in front of Doris, and the other kid had almost pissed his pants. If he stopped while he was ahead, he could even gain a good reputation for being magnanimous. Killing two birds with one stone, that would be even better. Thus, he shook his head and said, All right then, I'll let him go this time. He turned to Linka and sneered, Kid, you'd better not run into me in the academy tournament. Otherwise, I'll teach you a lesson. Linka did not dare to make a sound and kept quiet out of fear. Fatty's friends were disappointed that there wasn't any drama to watch, and Doris was even more displeased. She was about to start a fight, but this Qing Yaojin came out of nowhere and made the whole thing disappear. The group was almost done eating, so they paid the bill and left. Doris purposely walked past Reynolds and glared at him. Reynolds had always been very gentlemanly towards beautiful women. However, this kind of poisonous woman who tried to sow discord was no different from a pile of shit in his eyes. He didn't even want to look at her. Linka heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the group of people walking away. Renaud, why did we have to tolerate it? That fatty is going too far. Erin grumbled. Reynolds sighed and said, Erin, if we couldn't tolerate it, what else could we do? Fight? Look, so many people saw it. Even if we don't care, he might cause trouble for Linka every day in the future. How will Linka be able to study in the academy with peace of mind then? Erin was stunned. Indeed, she was the daughter of a rich family and a genius magician. Naturally, she wouldn't care about a low-level assassin. However, she forgot that she couldn't expose her strength, and she had to think about Linka. Although she was a genius in the field of magic, she was still lacking in consideration when it came to interpersonal conflict. However, how could she, the proud daughter of a guild leader, swallow this down? Renaud, are we just going to let it go like this? Of course not. Looking at him, he's at most a villain. A real noble wouldn't be so vulgar. We can look for him in private after a few days when the limelight dies down and settle our grudge. Compared to his submissive attitude just now, Reynolds's eyes flashed with disdain. Erin knew that Reynolds had a sense of propriety. She could only sigh. Thinking about what Reynolds had said, she had already sentenced that fat pig called Leopold to death in her heart. Renaud patted Linka's shoulder again. Brother, I know you're working hard. However, if you lack something, you will never be able to become an expert. Linka, who had just recovered from the shock, was shocked again. What? Renaud said seriously, courage. If you lack courage, you'll always be a coward. Linka seemed to be thinking about something. Reynolds did not disturb him and continued to eat. Judging from Linka's practice, Reynolds could tell that Linka was practicing very hard. Renaud felt that Linka had the potential to become a brave and powerful warrior, but his cowardice was the biggest obstacle. After the three walked out of the high-class restaurant, Renaud saw that Erin was still unhappy. He smiled and said, Erin, don't think too much. A real man knows when to yield, just like certain parts of our bodies. Don't you think so? Erin blushed again. Renaud, you said a real man knows when to yield. It's clear enough. You didn't have to add that last part. Renaud smiled. It'll be more vivid. You know, I'm a perfectionist. Yuji almost fell over. Perfection? Those smelly socks and dirty clothes were everywhere in the dormitory. How could there be such a perfect person? But after being teased by him, the young lady's anger was completely resolved. She began to talk and laugh with Renaud as usual. Linka interrupted. Renaud, what do you mean when you say a body part can yield arms? Renaud was startled. After a while, he sighed and said, Linka, a man like you is really a failure. Yuji also felt that Linka was too pure. She could be a national treasure. Even a girl like her who rarely came in contact with the opposite sex could understand the hidden meaning in Renaud's word. Linka was still confused. She followed behind the two and murmured in a daze, Why do you say I'm a failure? Why do you say I'm a failure? Is Renaud saying I lack courage? Renaud suddenly remembered something. Oh right, the fatty seemed to have said something about the academy tournament. What's that about? No way, you don't even know about the academy tournament? Renaud, you're such a failure as Randolph's student. Yuji seized the opportunity to scold Renaud. She wanted to give him a taste of his own medicine and avenge Linka. Chapter 424. However, Reynolds didn't care about the way she looked at him as if he was a newbie. He asked with interest, Shijun, do you know about it? Tell me about it. Is there any competition held in the school? Yuji felt a bit helpless. She realized that the only way to make her roommate blush was to cut his face with a knife. Not only in our school, but also in Chang, an academy. It's a competition between the martial arts class and the magic class. Reynolds's heart skipped a beat. What? Martial arts and magic academies? Linka also chimed in. Yeah, although Dean Randolph of our Chang, an academy, and honorary Dean Angela of the Magic Academy have a good relationship, they both think their students are more powerful due to their arrogance and pride. That's why the competition between the two academies was held. Reynolds stayed silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Then he asked, Linka, can you tell me more about the competition in detail? Sure. Linka was very familiar with this aspect. He spoke with fervor and assurance, which was very different from his usual stuttering. It seemed that he was very interested in this competition. The competition will be held 3 months after every new semester. The two academies will first conduct an internal screening and select a certain number of people from each class. There will be 20 people in each lower class, and all the upper class will participate. This is the first stage of the competition, the internal selection. After that, the students from the internal selection will draw lots to compete with the students from the other academy. Then, half of the students will be eliminated and the next round will be held. This is the second stage, the elimination round. For the sake of a fair competition, the number of classes for each specialization was the same for both academies. However, due to the single elimination tournament, the number of winners for each specialization would be different between the two academies. There would always be one side with more people who would advance. Therefore, at this time, the side with fewer people would draw lots and randomly choose students from the other academy. After the competition, the losers would be eliminated. Then, the side with fewer people would draw lots again and compete again. This is the third stage, the random round. The random round will be repeated until there are only a certain number of survivors from each class. Only then will the final round be held. Linka's eyes were full of expectation when she talked about the final round. Those who could make it to the final round would have a bright future. Reynolds asked, How is the final round held? Is it also a competition between the same grade? Linka said, That's right. Because there's a big difference in strength between the students who are one grade higher. It's very unfair if they're mixed. However, in order to prevent some of the younger geniuses from not getting a better chance to perform, the Academy specially added an additional rule that the students who were ranked at the top in their respective specializations could participate in the next year's competition. If your ranking in the next year's competition is still near the top, you can even fight your way into a higher level competition. To put it simply, there were different levels of competition between each grade. However, they were not completely unrelated. Just like some of the professional ball leagues on Earth, the high-ranking teams in the low-level leagues still had a chance to enter the high-level league. Yu added, also, the finals are no longer a competition between specializations, but a mixed competition. For example, a knight might face a mage, an assassin, or other professions. Renaud was puzzled. Linka, was there anyone in the past who was able to skip several levels in a row? It doesn't seem to be an ordinary level of difficulty. Linka nodded. It is very difficult, but it's not like no one can do it. Last semester, there was a new student in Sayara who skipped 3 levels in a row and ran all the way to the 4th grade competition before stopping. It's really amazing. The students of the academy have a total of 3 years of training, divided into 5 grades. Every half a year, they'll be promoted to the 4th grade in 2 years. However, not everyone has the opportunity to be promoted to the 5th grade for a year. Only the extremely outstanding people who pass the Academy's test can become 5th grade students. At this time, the most senior instructors are wholeheartedly focused on nurturing them and granting them the skills they're proud of. It's not an exaggeration to say that these people are the elites of the Empire's new elite. Reynolds's heart skipped a beat. Who is this person? Linka said with yearning. This person is a senior Grand Knight, Leon. Not only is he powerful and talented, but he's also handsome. Most importantly, he's the only son of the Kelly family in the super city, Bergman. Leon? Reynolds's heart skipped a beat. He instantly remembered that this was the knight who was following Irene around the weekend a few days ago. Well, the knight who was knocked out by his own lightning. It's nothing. Recently, Reynolds had been working hard to learn theoretical knowledge in the academy. He also trained his body diligently every day. Reynolds's body was completely different from when he was on Earth. He also had a well-defined 8-pack on his lower abdomen. Just like that, the days passed one after another. The second weekend of the academy came again. Reynolds missed Irene very much. He decided to take the Earth Dragon carriage again to see if Irene had time. In the dormitory, there was a knock on the door. Reynolds was lying on the bed. He shouted, "Shijun, open the door." "I don't want to." "You're closer to the door." Yuji was lying on the bed, covered in a blanket. She mumbled vaguely. Obviously, she was not awake yet. Reynolds had no choice but to jump off the bed and open the door. At the same time, he felt a little strange. Who could it be? Could it be Linka? Reynolds didn't expect that after opening the door, it would be Irene who he had been thinking about day and night. Irene was wearing a sky blue evening gown. She had long black hair. She looked at Reynolds with a smile. Seeing that Reynolds was staring at her in a daze without saying a word, her heart couldn't help but waver. She said, "Little Lin, why are you standing there like a fool? Aren't you going to let me in?" Okay. Ling come in quickly." Reynolds heard and quickly nodded. He brought Irene into the dormitory. Reynolds's dormitory was very clean. It even had a hint of fragrance. This was all thanks to Yuji. Yuji really couldn't stand Reynolds throwing his clothes and shoes everywhere when he came back every day. She had no choice but to take on the task of cleaning the dormitory. At this moment, Yuji was still sleeping soundly with her head covered. Perhaps her period hadn't ended yet. She didn't react when Reynolds brought someone in. Not bad. The dormitory is so clean. It's just, why is there a smell of blood? Irene sat on Reynolds's bed and looked at him with a sweet smile. Reynolds touched his head. He couldn't hide the joy on his face. He asked, "My dormitory mate Shijun suffered internal injuries from cultivation a few days ago. Ling why are you here?" Irene raised her eyebrows and asked, "Why can't I come?" Perhaps it was because she had been by Diao Chan's side for a long time. Irene's every move, frown, and smile was extremely similar to Diao Chan's temperament. It was becoming more and more charming. Chapter 425. No. I was just surprised. I wanted to find you, but I didn't expect you to come first. Reynolds laughed foolishly and shamelessly sat next to Aaron. He thought about it and felt that he wasn't close enough, so he quietly moved to Erin's side and leaned close to her. Erin rolled her eyes at him and didn't say anything, but her face blushed imperceptibly. "I came this time to attend a banquet with you," Erin said slowly. Her expression seemed to be troubled. "What banquet?" Erin thought about it and said, "It's how do I put it, a banquet for a prestigious family. There will be many students from the school. It's a social gathering." Reynolds smiled and said, "A prestigious family. Is it appropriate for me to go?" Erin rolled her eyes at Reynolds and said, "What's inappropriate about it? I'm just going to take a look. If it wasn't for our perverted class forcing us to attend, I wouldn't be bothered to go." "Ling, why did you think of inviting me? You already called me Ling. Is there anyone in this world who is close enough to call me Ling? Humph, no one." "Haha, then I'm really honored." The two were chatting when Yuji seemed to be unable to stand their voices. She covered her head with the blanket and complained in a low muffled voice, "Reynolds, I want to sleep." Reynolds smiled embarrassedly and said, "We'll go out now." Erin glanced at Yuji and showed a strange expression. She followed Reynolds out. "Oh right, Shijun. Do you have anything you want to eat? I'll bring it back for you." "Oh, yes. Custard buns." Reynolds responded and muttered, "Custard buns are custard buns," moaning like a big eagle cutie. "Luckily I'm not gay. Or I would have killed you long ago." Reynolds and Erin strolled around the school and learned all of Erin's experiences in this world. He also understood why Erin wasn't in Erin's class. It was a special class that had never existed in the entire school. It wasn't just because they killed each other and were selected through cruel tests. The entire class of more than 30 people was given special rights by Chang, an academy. They basically had classes every day, and their progress was twice as fast as normal classes. Everyone in this class would be valued by the Tang dynasty. Once they graduated from Chang, an academy, they would directly enter the army and be appointed as high officials. In other words, our class was directly sold to the Tang dynasty by the academy. Erin laughed bitterly. "Everything has been confiscated, including my cell phone. I'm so tired every day. I cry. It's so annoying. I even have to be harassed by those annoying pursuers from the academy. This place is really not as good as being with Sister Chan QAQ. I'll bring you back to Earth." Reynolds comforted Irene as he listened to her complaints. Erin stopped and looked at Reynolds. Reynolds also stopped and hesitated. He stepped forward and looked Erin in the eye. Even Reynolds began to stutter at this moment, unable to utter those few words. "I like you." Reynolds finally spat out those words. To his surprise, he realized that his face and ears were flushed red after he said those words. "That's right, I've liked Erin since a long time ago. Even when I first met her on the train and escaped for the first time, I already liked this strong, cute, and kind girl." Unexpectedly, Erin lowered her head, not daring to look into Reynolds's burning eyes. She hummed softly in acknowledgement. I like you. You. Ling, you. Reynolds's voice was trembling. He suddenly regretted saying so much. If he suddenly confessed, Erin would be shocked. Maybe Erin didn't even have that kind of feeling for him? "Hug me." "I see. Reynolds muttered to himself. He suddenly reacted and asked in surprise, "What?" Erin punched Reynolds and said, "Hug me." Reynolds was wild with joy and hugged Erin in his arms. Reynolds was 1.78 meters tall and Erin was 1.65 meters tall. She was completely docile in Reynolds's arms. The standard couple's height. The two idiots foolishly hugged each other for a full 10 minutes. During this time, neither of them spoke. One was shy, the other was wild with joy and didn't know what to say. "Okay, let's go to my dorm. I'll help you change. The banquet will start tonight." Erin was the first to speak. She broke free from Reynolds's arms and looked at Reynolds's face. She happily said, Little Lin, you have to quickly take me back to Earth. Don't worry, Linger. Not only will I take you back to Earth, but I will also understand the truth of this world, this Earth, and even this universe. Reynolds remembered that there were still many secrets that he didn't tell Aaron. The Apocalypse bracelet, the Underworld tree, and so on. He was filled with longing for this universe. I believe you, he. Aaron looked at Reynolds and said, I knew it. When I saw you play Mobile Legends on the train, I felt that you were very strong. Reynolds's memories were also evoked. He smiled and said, I might have liked you at that time. You were so silly when you played games. You were so cute. When they arrived at Aaron's dorm, Reynolds was immediately shocked. Every student in this special class had an individual dormitory, a single room. The dorm room was 100 square meters. Bathroom, dining room, bedroom, wooden floor, all kinds of ingredients, drinks, recovery medicine, clothes, and so on. Everything was available. Seeing Reynolds's envious expression, Aaron said helplessly, We've already sold ourselves to Tang Chao. Of course we have to be good to him. Reynolds sat on Aaron's bed and saw Aaron take out a lot of clothes from the wardrobe. He hesitated and said, I don't want to be too eye-catching. Is there any disguise technique? Or something like makeup? Aaron nodded and said, Of course there is. Sister Chan taught me a lot of techniques. Change into this dress first. After a while, Aaron took out a dress and handed it to Reynolds. Seeing Reynolds put it on, she said, Then I'll put on makeup for you. No one will be able to recognize you. 10 minutes later, Reynolds looked at the unfamiliar face in the mirror. It was a young man around 18 years old. The skin from his face to his neck had been darkened by Aaron's paint. His entire appearance was also very different from before. In reality, the overall outline was the same. It was just an illusion created by Aaron's skillful hands. Reynolds's eyebrows were sharper and thicker than before. They were less deep and more handsome. Chapter 426. The fake mustache above his lips made him look more mature. Coupled with his tuxedo-like attire and his height, Reynolds actually looked quite handsome. Irene's eyes sparkled as she looked at him. Not to mention acquaintances, even Reynolds himself couldn't recognize her. Thus, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, Ling is really amazing. Aaron nodded. She looked at her work and praised, Not bad. You really look like a charming little brother when you dress up like this. Reynolds smiled. Don't mention it, don't I usually look like this? Aaron rolled her eyes at Reynolds. This little Lin really didn't know what modesty was. Fortunately, Reynolds added, Of course, it's also because of my little Ling's miraculous hands that I was able to reach the next level. Aaron smiled shyly. Reynolds, you have to have a good face shape first. I only did a little work. Reynolds looked at the blushing Aaron and was very happy. He couldn't help but say, Ling you look very cute today. Aaron snorted, You don't have to say that. Along the way, Aaron kept reminding Reynolds about some things he had to pay attention to at the banquet. For example, he couldn't swagger when walking. He had to walk in small steps and not swing his hands too much. When standing, he had to hold his head high and maintain a smile on his face to show his confidence and joy at being able to attend the banquet. He couldn't look around, and if he wanted to see something, he had to twist his body to the front and not turn his head. Reynolds's head hurt. Diao Chan must have taught him this. There were too many rules, and he didn't know if he could remember them all. The two rode the Earth Dragon carriage and arrived at the banquet venue in less than an hour. After the two got off the carriage, a beast tamer immediately came to receive them. The transportation in this area was all free, and the beast tamers were all hired by the city. 10 minutes later, the two arrived in front of a vast and exceptionally gorgeous villa. The lights were bright and it was very lively. There were more and more celebrities, and it was obvious that they had arrived at their destination. Reynolds felt like he was a goose that had walked into a flock of cranes. Although he looked like a crane after dressing up, he was still a goose. It was impossible to change, and he felt a little uneasy. At this moment, Aaron's slender arms had already passed through the crook of his arm, intertwining with his. This was the necessary etiquette to enter the venue. Aaron's towering breasts inevitably pressed against Reynolds's arm. Reynolds immediately blushed and felt rather uncomfortable. Walking through a long corridor at the entrance, his eyes suddenly opened up. This was a large courtyard that was the size of a small square. A large number of waitresses were busily moving around with plates in their hands. The food and drinks in their hands could all be enjoyed at will. All kinds of celebrities were gathered in groups of 3 or 4 to chat. Irene nodded and smiled when she met others, greeting them. But she did not stop, because she had to first meet the master to show her respect. As for Reynolds, he could only follow suit and feel that he was no different from a prostitute. Reynolds didn't know what was going on, so he followed Aaron's gaze to the other side. It was a young man dressed in black, about 18 or 19 years old. He had a handsome face, a tall and straight figure, and his manners were very elegant. He was a very charming man, and many unmarried noble ladies surrounded him, hoping to win his favor. The man smiled as he dealt with them. His behavior was very appropriate, but his eyes were like an eagle's. Reynolds felt that he was somewhat familiar. When the man saw Aaron, he said "Excuse me" and escaped from the ladies' encirclement. He stopped in front of the two and said with a smile, "Aaron, long time no see." Reynolds took a look. Wasn't this the Knight of Leon who had been knocked unconscious by his own punishment a few days ago? Aaron also had a smile on her face, but the words she said almost made Reynolds laugh to death. "Leon, you're not dead yet?" Leon still maintained his smile. "Thanks to Miss Aaron, I'm still alive and well." To be able to maintain his composure after receiving such a vicious curse, this person's scheming was obviously very deep. It was the first time Reynolds had met this person since he came to King's Mainland. He couldn't help but look at him a few more times, but he didn't know what kind of conflict there was between Aaron and him. Aaron smiled even sweeter. "That's very good, but life is unpredictable. Mr. Leon, you have to be careful at all times every day. If you do too many things with a guilty conscience, it's easy to be unlucky. You might even fall to your death while walking." No matter how deep Leon was, he couldn't laugh in the end. His eyes flashed with a cold light, full of resentment. Aaron no longer paid attention to him, and pulled Reynolds straight over. Because Reynolds was wearing a hermit's cloak last time, Leon didn't recognize that Reynolds was the person who had knocked him unconscious this time. The host of tonight's banquet was the owner of the famous consumer bank of the Tang dynasty. Almost all commercial trade was under his jurisdiction. He could be said to be one of the top figures in society. The warrior was a middle-aged man in his 60s. He was flushed with success and enjoyed the blessings of every guest. Aaron and Reynolds came in front of him and bowed slightly. "Mr. Warrior, thank you for your invitation. Let Aaron have a pleasant night." Chien Duoduo had extensive connections and had deep or shallow friendship with almost everyone present. Hearing this, he laughed heartily and said, "Miss Aaron, your arrival also makes me feel incomparably honored. Oh, by the way, this handsome gentleman beside you is—" Reynolds saw that he was amiable, and his original nervousness dissipated slightly. Following Aaron's instructions, he put his hands flat on his chest and bowed slightly in a man's way and offered his fake name. "Raphael is very happy to be able to attend this special banquet, and thank you for your invitation, Mr. Chien Duoduo." Aaron added, "Raphael is my friend, a student of Chang, an academy like me." Chien Duoduo's expression immediately became respectful, and he nodded. "Mr. Raphael, you've awakened your innate ability at such a young age. You really have a promising future." Of course, this was also a polite remark. In fact, Chien Duoduo had never heard of this name, but if he continued to ask, it would be rude. Reynolds hurriedly said a few modest words, and together with Aaron, said a few words of blessings, and then this meeting of the host was considered to be over. Reynolds was anxious at first, but he didn't expect it to be so simple. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Aaron took him to the back courtyard. It was a very elegant and quiet place, and compared to the bustling courtyard with people coming and going, it was a world of difference. Exotic flowers and strange plants were everywhere, and the fresh air was refreshing. The breeze was gentle, and a few people were sitting on chairs to rest. Chapter 427. Walking on the stone path, they enjoyed the quiet moment away from the world. Usually, the place where a banquet was held would have such a backyard for the participants to rest. Once they were at the banquet, they would be busy almost all the time, even if it was just some boring chatter. This kind of banquet was actually very tiring, not physically but mentally. The hypocritical exchange of responses and smiles that did not come from the heart were even more tiring than fighting on the battlefield. Everyone was well aware of this, so the host provided a backyard for the guests who were tired of the banquet to rest a little. There were not many magic lamps here, only a few. A person's mask could be taken off here, and no one would see it. So Irene's smiling face immediately sank, and her eyes were full of anger. Even Reynolds admired her quick change of expression. He asked with concern, "Ling, are you okay?" Irene's chest rose and fell violently, as if she was suppressing her anger. After a while, she calmed down. "Reynolds, don't worry, I'm fine." Reynolds took 2 cups of blue drink from a passing maid's plate. After she walked away, Reynolds handed one of them to Irene. "Drink some hot water and calm down." Aaron took it with a strange smile on her face. "Thank you, my straight man Lindsay." Reynolds shook his head and asked tentatively, "Is it because of that Leon just now? Who is he?" Irene heard this name and her expression changed again. Without waiting for Irene to answer, he added, "It seems that something happened between you two." Irene took a sip of the drink. Perhaps this natural warm liquid helped her mood, but her expression was much better. She suddenly said, "Yes, it's because of Leon, the son of Gith, the president of the Rakshasa Empire's professional union, and the only son of the Kelly family in the supercity Bergman. He's also one of the best in our academy, a 5th-year student in Chang'an Academy." Reynolds was a bit confused. How could such a powerful person be knocked out by his punishment? Although he had been working hard in the academy for a long time, he was definitely stronger than the average person. Irene was stunned for a moment and said, "At the time of the academy selection, we killed each other. You know this?" Reynolds nodded. Irene thought of the scene at that time and smiled bitterly. She said, "It was really tragic. Several hundred students were lying on the ground, their blood flowing like a river. Although they didn't die, there were still teachers who came to save them. But that kind of scene is really comparable to a war. In the end, there were only about 30 people left. Leon, that shameless guy, is one of them." Reynolds listened quietly, his heart aching as he looked at Aaron's face. The test has already ended. Perhaps it was because his bloodlust and bestial nature had been aroused. Leon, that beast, cultivated the power of darkness and began to kill in all directions. At that time, Anyang was already exhausted. No, it should be said that most people were exhausted, including me. Anyang saved me, but he was corroded by the power of darkness and was heavily injured. I don't know when he will wake up. Aaron let out a long sigh and looked at Reynolds. "Anyang? That handsome young man you told me about on WeChat. Because he saved you." Aaron walked over and hugged Reynolds. "All right, Lindsay, I'll go entertain the guests now. As long as you stay here, there won't be any trouble, and no one will bother you. This is a place to rest. It's really hard for you that I can't accompany you." Reynolds patted Aaron's back and said, "Oh, that's really great. It's okay, Ling, go ahead." After a pause, Reynolds said, "You've really become mature and cute, generous and decent, beautiful and charming, gentle and kind. Stop, stop, stop. Aaron covered Reynolds's mouth with one hand and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Are you an idiot? Am I still that me? Without waiting for Reynolds to speak, she continued. But you're right, I really am like that. Hee underscore, smiley face, angle, underscore. Reynolds looked at Aaron's cute appearance and didn't wait for her to agree before hugging her. What are you doing? Hee, I want to go back to the dormitory with you to watch the sunrise. Watch the sunrise? Don't think I don't know what you're trying to do. So you found out. After Aaron left, Reynolds's heart warmed. He and Aaron were together now, right? Love came too fast, like a tornado. Reynolds suddenly thought of this line and felt that it was very appropriate. Some people never saw a tornado in their lives. Crossing over to another world was even rarer than seeing a tornado. Although it was a bit boring to be alone in the backyard, it was much better than boring socializing. Reynolds was still very satisfied. The only fly in the ointment was that he was hungry. He originally thought that he could eat a good meal at the banquet to soothe his stomach. But Aaron told him on the way that this banquet was mainly for socializing and was different from ordinary banquets. So it was best not to eat randomly, otherwise it would be very embarrassing. Although there was a lot of food in the backyard, it was actually prepared for the children who came with the adult. The adult nobles wouldn't enjoy it, so Reynolds's plan to go on a killing spree was aborted. In the backyard, there was only fruit juice and wine to drink. If he ate in such a beautiful place, it would be too much of a bummer. When he returned to the dormitory, it was already late at night. Reynolds suddenly remembered that he hadn't bought the custard bun he promised to buy for June. He slapped his forehead and thought, oh no. How could he forget what he had promised others? He was really too naughty. Thinking of this, Reynolds revealed a smile and gently pushed open the door. He found that the dormitory was completely dark. He thought to himself, don't worry, June should be asleep. He also quietly went to sleep. By the next day, she might forget about this matter. After making up his mind, Reynolds gently closed the door and tiptoed onto the bed. Click! Reynolds was just about to sleep when the magic lamp was turned on. Reynolds sat up suddenly and looked at June, who suddenly appeared in front of him. He was shocked. Hey! June, why aren't you asleep yet? Aaron thought, I slept too much during the day, how can I sleep at night? But you damn pervert, I haven't seen you for the whole day. Where did you go? Aaron asked, where did you go? Why did you come back so late? You reek of alcohol. Go take a bath. Reynolds smiled bitterly. It's just a banquet. Can I not take a bath? I'm super tired. Aaron shook her head firmly. Reynolds had no choice but to get out of bed. He knew that this roommate of his was a clean freak. There was no smell in the dormitory. However, he seemed to have forgotten about the custard bun. Nice. Chapter 428. Irene looked at Reynolds's back and snorted coldly. She muttered softly, I knew you would forget about my custard bun QEQ. After a warm weekend, the second day after returning to the academy, the practical class finally began. The first thing to be learned in the practical class wasn't hacking, defense, cultivation, or offensive skills. Instead, it was the spirit escape technique. It was an escape technique that could save one's life. When a martial artist encounters a powerful magical beast or even a war monster and is unable to win, the best choice is not to fight like a bull, but to escape. This isn't a disgrace. Only by staying alive can one continue to enjoy life. Continue to contribute to the Tang Empire army. This is the correct way to think. Knowing that one is no match for the enemy, but courting death is not bravery, but stupidity. Thus, the Tang Empire army not only doesn't forbid escape, but encourages it. Run more. This was before the practical class. Instructor Baroque's short and humorous explanation of the spirit escape technique caused the students to burst into laughter. In the crowd, Reynolds whispered to Irene, June, this Instructor Baroque is really interesting. I like him. Irene asked curiously, "You like him?" "Oh." Seeing that everyone was laughing, Baroque's tone turned serious. "But you can't just run away under any circumstances. When the magical beasts attack the city and war is imminent, those who are tasked to stop the magical beasts but run away out of fear of death are insulting to the spirit of warriors and disloyal to the Tang Empire army. We can't allow such a thing to happen. Even if we die gloriously on the battlefield, we have to protect the safety of the city. Do you all understand?" Everyone replied in unison, "Yes." It was the spirit of warriors that could be instilled in them at any moment that gave these rookies, who would one day step onto the battlefield and face the terrifying magical beasts, enough courage and unwavering belief. Baroque continued, "All right, I won't beat around the bush. Now I'll talk about spirit escape technique. There are many types of spirit escape techniques according to the professions. For example, the Magic Path Master's Wind Controlling Technique, the Charm Master's Speed Talisman, the Assassin's Charge Technique, the Hunter's Beast Dash." He listed more than 10 spirit escape techniques in one breath and said, "However, what I'm going to teach you is a technique that most professions use. It's also the most basic spirit escape technique. Light body technique. Don't think that basic skills are the lowest level skills. In fact, if you can use them flexibly, light body technique is just as effective as other spirit escape techniques, or even more useful. Next, I will teach you how to use the spiritual energy of the light body technique." Reynolds was also very interested in this skill. To put it bluntly, it was a displacement skill. For example, there were various heroes in King of Glory who had displacement skills, such as Hua Mulan, Diao Chan, Miyamoto Musashi. Most importantly, the distance and speed of the displacement were completely controlled by one's mental strength. Although Reynolds didn't know what was going on with this spiritual energy, he felt that every time he used a skill, his mind would become clearer. There wasn't the slightest bit of dizziness caused by the exhaustion of spiritual energy like the teacher had said. Maybe his constitution was very special? Or maybe it was the existence of the Apocalypse bracelet. The morning class ended just like that. After eating lunch, Reynolds walked to the training field alone. According to the method taught by the teacher, he poured spiritual energy into his feet. Looking straight ahead, Reynolds instantly felt that his feet were filled with power. "Ha!" Reynolds roared loudly. His feet stomped hard on the ground, and his body flew up with a whoosh. The soles of his feet shook violently. It felt as if a bomb had exploded below him. Reynolds found himself flying straight ahead. Caught off guard, he was so scared that he danced and screamed. Of course, he also threw all the things he had just revised, such as maintaining his balance, to the back of his mind. Bang! The unlucky Reynolds directly crashed into a big tree 7 meters in front of him. There was an intimate contact between them, and then he bounced back to the ground. Reynolds almost had a concussion from the fall. He couldn't get up on all fours. His eyes were twinkling, and the sky was filled with little stars. Reynolds rubbed his forehead, and it took him a long time to recover. Although his head didn't hurt anymore, Reynolds could clearly feel a wave of tiredness in his mind. Reynolds knew that this was the result of using his spiritual energy. It could also be said that his spiritual energy was insufficient. However, the use of this skill made Reynolds incomparably shocked. The laws of physics in this world were completely different from those on Earth. Every place, every corner of the king's realm was filled with spiritual energy. As long as it was a person, they could use the surrounding spiritual energy to cultivate skills. Some people were born with extraordinary talent. Their whole body was filled with spiritual energy, and then they would awaken innate skills. People with innate skills would cultivate their skills much faster than those mediocre people. Reynolds's heart was moved. He began to seriously review the knowledge he had recently learned in the training field. Mastering it through a comprehensive study, he unceasingly cultivated, wiping away his sweat. He unceasingly practiced magic arts, various skills, and his body's own tempering. This was the majority of Reynolds's time in the school. He had to achieve victory in the upcoming interclass competition. He must become stronger. He must become stronger. He must become stronger. This was Reynolds's biggest goal. After returning to the dormitory, Reynolds found that it was empty. His roommate Sher-June wasn't there. It's already noon. Did Sher-June go to eat alone? Reynolds shook his head and walked out of the dormitory. Along the way, the students around him were discussing spiritedly. Hey, did you hear? Dean Randolph personally came to check on today's test. It can't be? Why not? Let's go quickly. Let's go see Dean Randolph. We won't be able to see him if we're late. Reynolds suddenly remembered that after today's class, he had to go to the training field to test his own data. This test data was equivalent to an exam. It could clearly measure the knowledge and skills that the students had grasped during this period of time. Then, the teachers would guide the students according to their characteristic. The most important thing was that Dean Randolph would come to supervise and guide him personally. It was like Jordan watching you play basketball. In the training field, Reynolds saw that many students' hands were trembling. They were afraid that they wouldn't perform well in front of Randolph. Reynolds felt that a big shot like Randolph was willing to come to the lower classes testing field. This kind of equal treatment was a very great thing. Unfortunately, it was unnecessary. Many people were too nervous and couldn't perform well. It seemed that this old guy was really an idiot. In terms of management and guidance, he was indeed inferior to the representative of the Devil Path Academy, Angela. Chapter 429. It was said that although the Martial Arts Academy and the Diabolism Academy both belonged to Chang, an academy, everyone here knew that the two branches were sworn enemies. And the Martial Arts Academy had always been suppressed by its sworn enemy. Reynolds had long known the reason. Apart from their bad luck and not being able to recruit as many outstanding talents as the Diabolism Academy, the Martial Arts Academy itself had some problems. Most of the instructors had been infected by Rudolph's dullness. The more serious ones were as if they would chop you up if you bothered them for a while. Which student dared to ask questions? Naturally, it was difficult for them to improve. A fiery arrow flew to the center of the field, where a drum-shaped tester that looked like stone but wasn't stone, jade but wasn't jade. It immediately burst open, and the flames were quickly absorbed like water meeting a sponge. The basic cultivation technique instructor, Jack, read out the data loudly. Gabriel, physical damage 358, fire damage 277, overall damage 565. Good. Next, Green Eye. The overall damage here, in addition to the physical impact, also included the characteristics of each element, such as the heat of fire, the hardness of gold, the vitality of wood, the flexibility of water, the gravity of earth, and the sharpness of wind. A male elven magic archer, Gabriel, who had just taken the test, walked down the stage dejectedly. Elves usually had better control over the elements, and he was also one of the best in Renault's class. It was a pity that he had failed the test and was unable to display his usual strength. Seeing his performance, Rudolph's face was still dull. He was neither surprised nor happy, and there was no emotional fluctuation. The examinee this time was Qing Tong, a female student whose skin was green all over. Even her nails and hair were green. From afar, she looked like a plant. She was from the master of the forest clan and was proficient in the wood element. She was also one of the powerful figures in Reynolds' class. Green Eye took out a shiny dagger and held it in a reverse grip. She secretly channeled her spiritual power. Soon, a layer of green mist wrapped around the dagger, steaming and curling like a poisonous snake. Wood elemental spiritual energy seemed to be rather strange. And its characteristics were indeed strange. The wood element magic fighting energy was active. When it entered the enemy's body, it would not destroy the base spirit to a certain extent and then disappear. It would invade bit by bit like maggots in the tarsal bone, which was very troublesome. Many assassins were of the wood element. After a successful attack, the enemy would have to deal with the spirit energy invading their body. This distraction gave the assassin a great opportunity, which could be said to be very vicious. Ching Tong was the assassin. She appeared to be more reserved and rarely interacted with others in class. At this moment, she was also silent. She stood 5 meters away from the testing machine with her knees slightly bent. Suddenly, her body shot forward like an arrow, and at the same time, she stabbed the dagger in her hand into the testing machine. Light body technique. The students exclaimed in surprise. Their light body technique and displacement techniques were not effective yet. They could only leap about 4 meters forward. They did not expect Ching Tong to have reached such a level. She was standing 5 meters away from the tester, but it didn't mean that she could advance 5 meters because the tester was in front of her, eliminating the residual force. Based on this calculation, Ching Tong should be able to advance at least 8 meters, which was a very impressive result. Jack's expression changed slightly, but he still quickly read out the numbers. Physical damage 543, wood active damage 450, overall damage 993. Even Jack was surprised by these numbers. He did not expect such a powerful talent to appear in the lower class. This assassin was indeed powerful. She used the momentum of the light body technique to increase her physical damage to more than 500. However, her wood activity could not be underestimated. What was more rare was her mental fortitude. In front of Rudolph, she performed better than usual. It was a pity that Rudolph was still petrified, as if he did not see it. After a pause, Jack said, "Very good. Next, Andy." There were still many testers in front of him. Reynolds felt a little bored. Plus, he had trained too hard last night, so he took a nap. For a moment, there was a lot of discussion in the testing field. Of course, most of them were mocking and ridiculing. The most shocking was actually Reynolds's friend, Linka, who he had just met not long ago. He could not believe that Reynolds was so weak, nor was he willing to believe that Reynolds was so weak. There were only 2 people in the testing field who were calm. One was Yuji. She did not think that her roommate was very strong. After a long period of training in the academy, Yuji at most admitted that he was very hard-working. Also, the strength of his talent skills was very strong. So now, seeing Reynolds's numbers, she did not feel that it was strange. The other person was the dean of the academy, Rudolph. Reynolds crawled off the testing field dejectedly. Although he was the first to fail in the class, and could even be said to be the only one with such poor results among the freshmen, Reynolds was not dejected because of this. It was because after using his true strength, he realized that his results were not passing. It was as if his long time of hard work was somewhat in vain. This made Reynolds a little vexed. However, Reynolds was wrong. Reynolds was a very ordinary person. To be able to cultivate to such a number, if placed on Earth, it would not be difficult for him to beat a dozen of peak martial arts muscular men. Next, the others also did the test. Yuji's numbers were above average. She was not the best, but she was better than the average person. It seemed that she had concealed some of her strength. After the test, Rudolph, who had not spoken or moved, walked over. He walked straight to Reynolds, pointed at him, and said, "You follow me." Then he turned and left. Everyone was stunned. Reynolds was a little strange. Could it be that, because he failed, he was going to be disciplined by this fossil? The others' eyes were full of sympathy. Only Jack was thoughtful. "Dean Rudolph, I will work harder in the future. I will not be lazy, and I will not let down the teachers, the academy, and the people of the empire." As soon as Reynolds entered the dean's office, he immediately took the initiative to admit his mistake. This was a trick he had learned when he was caught skipping classes in junior high and high school. This way, the teachers would feel that he was repentant and would not scold him too much. Unfortunately, Rudolph did not fall for this trick. He only said, "Sit down, let's talk slowly." Reynolds was really flattered. He thought that he could only stand and be scolded. He did not expect Rudolph to invite him to sit. The big shot was too polite, which was beyond Reynolds's expectations. As a result, he felt uneasy, not knowing what would happen. After Rudolph sat down, he slowly said, "This student, your name is Reynolds, right?" Reynolds nodded repeatedly. "Yes, yes." "Well, student Reynolds, your control of spiritual power is the best in the class." "Very good." Chapter 430. Reynolds mumbled, "Dean Rudolph, you really know how to joke." It was obvious that he didn't even pass the test just now. Reynolds thought that Rudolph was being sarcastic. Could it be that Rudolph saw through his concealment of strength? Rudolph's eyes lit up. He was completely different from the usual dull old man. Now, he was showing the demeanor of a strong man. "Reynolds, let's not beat around the bush. You must have concealed your strength at that time, right? Although you looked like you were doing your best, I didn't feel a big fluctuation of spiritual power. This proves that you were very relaxed when you punched. Moreover, how can the acting head of the Holy Knights be weak? And most importantly, your body has a fresh smell. It's like a smell that even I haven't felt before." Rudolph reached out and grabbed Reynolds's wrist. He took off his sleeve and looked at the bracelet on his wrist. His eyes were like lightning as he looked at Reynolds and asked in a deep voice, "How did you get this?" Sure enough, it was because of this bracelet. Athena and Hua Mulan had told him about it. Even the deceased Madame Black Scorpion said that it was an ominous object. Reynolds thought for a moment and told the whole story of the bracelet. He just omitted the underworld in the bracelet. When he heard that Reynolds and Athena knew each other and took risks, Rudolph was surprised. "Athena, that woman, actually allowed you to stay by her side?" Reynolds nodded and said, "I don't know, maybe we're birds of a feather." Looking at Rudolph's disbelieving eyes, Reynolds smiled and said, "Maybe Athena likes me." "Hee, don't you think so, Dean?" Rudolph didn't expect this seemingly calm young man to be so shameless. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand and said, "Forget it. That's not important. What's important is the bracelet." Rudolph sighed and said, "From now on, don't show the bracelet to others." Reynolds nodded. Even if Rudolph didn't ask him to, he wouldn't be stupid enough to show the bracelet to others. "Be my student." Reynolds was surprised. He looked at Rudolph in front of him and asked, "Be your student?" Rudolph nodded and said, "I believe in my eyes." But, seeing that Reynolds was still surprised, Rudolph smiled and said, "If I say that I just don't want to lose to that little girl Angela, is that reason enough?" There was nothing they could do about it. Because Rudolph was getting older and older, he no longer had the energy to manage the Martial Arts Academy or even the entire Rudolph Academy. Therefore, they always lost to Angela's Magic Academy in the annual school tournament. Most importantly, there weren't any outstanding figures among the new students of the academy. But the Demonic Path Academy had recruited several young heroes from prestigious families. If he guessed correctly, the top 8 freshmen would be taken by them. Then, the Martial Arts Academy would be in an awkward position. Reynolds became serious and asked, "Dean, the skill you want to teach me?" At this time, Rudolph said word by word, "Storm Kill." This old man, who had never admitted defeat in his entire life, was finally showing signs of dejection after the academy he managed had been suppressed by the Demon Path Academy for many years. In recent years, the number of talents in the academy had withered away. After all, when one was old, one's state of mind couldn't be compared with a newborn calf that was not afraid of anything and would continue to run after falling down. Reynolds saw that Rudolph's face looked much older when he sighed. His blood boiled and he said, "Dean, don't worry, I will never lose face for our academy." Listening to Reynolds's excited and confident answer, Rudolph seemed to see himself in the past, a hot-blooded and energetic young man. He comforted him and said, "Good, good. Young people need confidence. Even if you fail, as long as you have the courage to try and challenge, you will succeed one day." He paused for a moment and said, "Storm kill is a profound skill. Even if it is a basic skill, it will still be difficult to learn in a short time. Reynolds, just do your best. You don't need to force yourself. I am very satisfied with your ambition and sense of collective honor." At that moment, he told Reynolds how to operate, release, and balance the spiritual power of Storm Kill. Although it was only a basic skill, it was still very complicated. The soul of this skill was wind. It was not an ordinary wind. It was the most powerful tornado in nature. It could easily lift up a 10,000-ton ship. The most important thing was that using this skill consumed a lot of spiritual power. Rudolph still taught Reynolds this skill with more than 10 days left before the assembly. It was mainly because of his precise control of the element. Maybe he could really create a miracle and grasp it in such a short time. Generally speaking, one's spiritual power had to reach a certain level to be able to practice Storm Kill. However, Reynolds was an exception. Under Rudolph's guidance, Reynolds was told that the Apocalypse Bracelet was an inexhaustible artifact. At any time, the bracelet could absorb the spiritual elements in the king's realm. In order to make it easier for him to understand, Rudolph took Reynolds to the field. Although it was only one night, to be able to get the personal guidance of the skill's owner was better than any profound and thorough theory. The two found a secluded place. After all, the dean was personally teaching a student, and it was his famous Storm Kill. This kind of thing was really too rare. If it attracted a large number of onlookers, Reynolds wouldn't be able to practice peacefully even if he wanted to. "Okay, Reynolds, you try it according to my method. The target is this tree in front of you." Rudolph pointed at a tree that was more than 20 meters tall. Its roots were coiled with serpents, and its trunk was covered with scales. It was so big that it could only be hugged with both hands. This tree was really too thick and solid, and it was also incomparably hard. Because of its skin, it was called the dragon scale tree. Students usually used it to practice their balance control. Because many magic beasts were also covered with scales, metal weapons would easily rebound when they hit them. If they didn't learn how to react to emergencies, they would be attacked to death. Among the skills he learned, only sword chi and the like could cause a lot of damage to the dragon scale tree. Other physical skills such as weapons, as well as spiritual power weapons, would be useless. It would be good if he could peel off one or two of its scales. Reynolds blushed with shame. "Dean Rudolph, I'm afraid." Rudolph smiled and interrupted him. "Just try it as a target. Use the strength you used in the test today. Don't use the power of the Apocalypse Bracelet. Looking at you, you won't use the Apocalypse Bracelet, right?" Chapter 431. Hearing Rudolph's question, Reynolds hesitated and said, "I don't know, but every time I practice, no matter how tired I am, I always recover very quickly." Rudolph nodded. "That's right. You can continue just like how you normally cultivate." Reynolds said, "Okay." Then he picked up a long sword. Originally, he could use Storm Kill without a weapon. But Rudolph said that in a battle, when the two sides' weapons collided under the huge force, sometimes there would be unpredictable balance errors, exposing defense flaws. Even the top experts were no exception. It was just that they could reduce the number of mistakes to the minimum, and the degree of their mistakes was minimal. The flaws were so weak that they could almost be ignored. Storm Kill was even more effective when the weapons collided, and it was impossible to guard against. So Reynolds accepted his advice. Under Rudolph's guidance, he quickly gathered the spiritual power in his body, and then he swung his sword at the dragon-scaled tree. Bang! The tree trembled slightly and then returned to normal. A light breeze drifted out from the long saber in Reynolds's hand, blowing the grass in front of him, and causing it to bend backward. Rudolph nodded and said, "Well, you can make such a strong wind on your first try, not bad. But according to the deviation of the wind, you added too much spiritual power." Note, although the gathering of spiritual power and the skill are instantaneous, the process of the spiral spiritual power is relatively continuous. During the whole process, the fusion of spiritual power has to be balanced. If there is a slight deviation in the middle, the spiritual power will be wasted. Reynolds nodded, and then he swung his sword at the tree again. The spiritual power is too strong this time. Rudolph only commented briefly. Reynolds swung his sword again. The wind is weaker than before. Because of the two failures of the fusion, you hesitated midway. However, the tornado kill is about pressing forward with an indomitable momentum. You can't hesitate because you need to control the fusion and balance of the spiritual power. The coordination of the footwork is wrong. The center of gravity has to be lowered by 5 centimeters. The posture of swinging the sword is wrong. The power is not enough. It is easy to be bounced away, and the skill will hit somewhere else. Every time Reynolds swung his sword, Rudolph immediately pointed out the mistakes in his practice. Storm Kill was a large collection of martial arts, not as simple as the fusion of spiritual power. However, the fusion of spiritual power was the key to the soul. Reynolds didn't know how many thousands of times he had swung his blade and swallowed hundreds of recovery pills. Unknowingly, it was already close to midnight, but there was still no significant progress. This kind of micromanipulation of the abnormal balance of spiritual power was like a grown man playing with an embroidery needle. It was indescribably difficult and required an amazing amount of patience. If it was someone with a more irritable personality, they would have directly shot him to death. Reynolds felt that even if he had to perform an attack that exceeded his spiritual energy limit, it would probably be much easier than practicing this. However, after several months of hard work, he had already cultivated enough patience and willpower to continue trying without discouragement. The other party was the esteemed principal, yet he had still squeezed out precious time to guide the other party until now. How could he possibly give up now? Bang! After another collision with the tree knife, the situation became slightly abnormal. The grass at the back was blown to different places by the wind. Some were in front, some were behind, some were to the left, some were to the right, some were to the front, some were to the back, some were to the left, some were to the right. Seeing this, Rudolph was overjoyed. Good, good. You can actually release the spiral chi. Reynolds, I didn't misjudge you. You really are the best candidate to learn the killing storm. Then Rudolph looked at Reynolds and said, Now, use your bracelet and use the spiritual power in it for yourself. Swing this knife. Hearing this, Reynolds' bracelet shone brightly. He looked straight ahead and enchanted the long knife with spiritual power. Then, he used all his strength to swing it out. Bang! Like a mini tornado, the dragon scale tree in front of him was like a hollow tree trunk. With a cracking sound, it was easily swept up into the sky by the tornado. This was not enough. The tornado's remaining power was still strong, and the whole lawn on the ground was turned over from the bottom. It wasn't until the tornado flew dozens of meters away that it slowly dissipated. So powerful, Reynolds looked at the result of his actions in a daze. Good, good, good. Rudolph said good 3 times in one breath. It was enough to show how happy Rudolph was at the moment. Reynolds, although you just learned it, the killing storm already has such power. Reynolds, you really are the best student I've ever met in my life. Ha! Looking at how happy the dean was, Reynolds could only touch his forehead in embarrassment. Reynolds, remember, practice according to my method, and your maelstrom killing technique will become stronger and stronger. I'm looking forward to the Academy tournament. Rudolph patted Reynolds' shoulder and encouraged him with a smile. Reynolds was quite moved. He said, Dean, don't worry. I won't let you down. You've worked hard. Rudolph sighed. I'm old and my energy is not as good as before. In the past, I used to practice hard all night. Now I just stand for a while and I feel tired. No matter how strong a person was, after aging, the vitality of the spirit would never be as good as when they were young. This was the capital of youth. After saying that, Rudolph used the light body technique and went away. His light body technique was as good as his martial art. He was agile and steady, like a meteor catching up with the moon. After 2 ups and downs, he was already out of sight. Reynolds couldn't help but marvel. Although the Dean's light body technique was not as gorgeous and dazzling, it was not slow and was comparable to Athena's strength. He didn't know when he could reach that level. After sighing, Reynolds continued to practice patiently like he was learning embroidery. The tournament was approaching day by day, and he didn't have much time left. Back in the dormitory, Reynolds looked at Sir June, who had fallen asleep, and sighed. For 2 whole months, he had been practicing in the Chang An Academy. Touching his 8-pack abs and pinching the muscles on his arms, Reynolds's lips curled up. It was all thanks to the abundant spiritual power in this world, which was so suitable for practicing. The first skill he learned was the powerful killing storm. If he kept working hard, the future would be better. Reynolds gradually fell asleep with this thought. On the last day before the tournament, Reynolds didn't plan to practice. After all, it was not easy to bear overload for a long time. There had to be a buffer. Moreover, Reynolds had a more important thing to do: buy armor. Usually, Reynolds would wear the few sets of armor given by the academy in class. They were the lowest grade ones, made of animal skin. For newbie warriors who had just entered the profession, this kind of light armor was just right for them. Some armors with strong defensive power, but too heavy, would be difficult for them to bear with their weak strength, and would only have the opposite effect in battle. Chapter 432. Reynolds, an earthling, had never been interested in armor. If not for the Academy's special request or when he was training, he would usually dress casually. However, facing such an important day like the tournament, this outfit was different. A good set of armor could raise the strength of a fighter to a higher level, and when challenging a monster, it could be used to protect one's life. Most importantly, wearing a cool armor could highlight one's heroic figure and make one look more handsome. As for what kind of armor he should buy to suit his own characteristics, Reynolds still had no idea. The other warriors had different characteristics compared to his own, so it would be difficult to ask them anything. Therefore, Reynolds decided to ask for Rudolph's opinion. However, Reynolds was a little hesitant before he came to the office because he saw that Rudolph was very busy with tomorrow's tournament. He was like an ant on a hot pan. It would not be good to disturb him now. Fortunately, Reynolds did not need to hesitate because Rudolph had already seen him and waved. "Reynolds, you're here. I was just about to look for you." Reynolds walked into the office and said, "Dean Rudolph, what can I do for you?" Rudolph said as he sorted out the materials, "The tournament is starting tomorrow. I see that you don't usually wear decent armor. This won't do." Reynolds thought to himself, what a coincidence, they thought of the same thing. "Dean, I came here today to ask for your advice. What kind of armor is best for me to use in a situation like mine? Soft or hard armor, light or heavy armor?" Rudolph laughed. "Don't worry, I've already prepared it. No matter how strong you are, you're still a freshman and lack real combat experience. Especially in a duel with a master, you may lose if you're not careful. A good set of armor will, at least, increase your chances of winning. You're the biggest hope of our academy's freshmen. Of course, I have to take special care of you." Reynolds was so happy that he was about to laugh out loud. The armor that the dean had personally prepared for him was definitely something good. It was truly timely help. As Rudolph spoke, he took out the thing he had mentioned from his spatial ring. It was a set of folded gray armor. There were no fancy patterns on it, and it was not made of shiny metal. It was as inconspicuous as Rudolph himself. Rudolph unfolded the armor and proudly said, "What do you think?" Reynolds scrutinized it for a long time before giving an honest evaluation. Apart from the design being a little old-fashioned, it seems to be pretty good. He was a little disappointed. This fellow didn't look much better than the one given out by the Academy. Rudolph almost fainted. "You really don't know what's good for you. This is mobile armor. Normally, only the joints can move freely, and it will more or less affect the user's movement. Mobile armor, on the other hand, was different. In addition to being able to fold freely, every part of it could be stretched and contracted freely. Wearing it was similar to wearing cotton clothes. What was even rarer was that the material was the skin of the Qing fish from the Storm Strait. The skin of this monster fish had excellent defense and was as soft and slippery as oil. When weapons hit it, it was easy to slide away and deviate from the body. It was one of the best soft armor materials. However, the chances of the Qing fish leaving behind materials after their deaths were shockingly low. Usually they would turn into spiritual energy. Only one piece of fish skin out of 10,000 fish could be guaranteed. Back then, when I was practicing the art of balance and absolute storm kill on the Storm Strait, I didn't know how many Qing fish I had to kill to gather enough materials for a full set of armor. For assassin-type warriors like you who don't have high spiritual energy but can use it at an amazing speed, it's practically tailor-made for you. Reynolds scratched his head. So that's how it is. It sounds good. Rudolph rolled his eyes. It doesn't sound good. It's absolutely good. This set of armor is called Wave Breaker. It was my favorite toy in my early years. Reynolds said embarrassedly, "Dean, you should keep it." "How can I take it away?" Rudolph said, "It doesn't matter. Compared to people at our level, its defensive power is too insignificant. It's almost the same as wearing it. It's better to give it to you. You can contribute more to the Academy." Even so, there was still some nostalgia in his eyes. After all, this set of armor had accompanied him since he was young. They had gone through ups and downs together and had witnessed his growth. They had cultivated a certain degree of affection for each other. It was almost like an old friend who had known each other for many years. Rudolph stroked the armor twice as if he was saying goodbye. He quickly passed it to Reynolds. After all, it was best for the armor to play its role on the battlefield instead of lying dormant in the space ring. That would be too much of a waste for it. Reynolds took it and saw a small piece of blue jade at the heart of the armor. It was very beautiful. The jade was constantly bubbling, like a fish exhaling. This was the only outstanding part of the armor's appearance. Without exception, the other parts were all gray scales. Reynolds pointed at the blue gem. "Dean, what's the use of this thing?" Rudolph nodded. "It's the crystal core of the magic Qing fish. The chance of getting it is much lower than the fish skin. I only got one. Although the Qing fish skin is a dead object, it is alive to a certain extent. Its soul is this crystal core. It can establish a summoning contract. Even if it is accidentally lost or stolen, it can be recovered through summoning. In addition, when it is damaged, as long as the degree of damage is not too excessive, it can repair itself." After listening to Rudolph list out the advantages of the armor, Reynolds finally realized how precious this set of armor was. He rubbed his hands together and said with difficulty, "Dean, are you really giving it to me?" Rudolph smiled. "Do you think I will go back on my words? I have already cancelled the summoning contract with Polong. After the two of you re-establish a contract, you will be its next master. As long as you don't cancel the contract, no one can take it away from you. Be it the most loyal pet or the most loyal armor." Rudolph immediately passed the contract to Reynolds and began the master recognition ceremony again. When Reynolds walked out of the dean's office, he did not feel the weight of the armor increase. His movements did not change. On the contrary, Polong was as light as a feather. Just like Rudolph said, it was like a piece of cloth. It also had excellent flexibility and did not affect the movement of the whole body. On this day, Reynolds only practiced the daily routine of spiritual circulation. The rest of the time was reserved for rest. At night, he chatted with Aaron, but it didn't take long before he went to bed. This was the first time Reynolds went to bed so early since he was bored and went to the training field every day. Chapter 433. Very good, you've successfully cleaned yourself up. You look much better now than when you first came down. After the space stabilized for a long time, the Star Elf Big Boss suddenly said. Luigi realized that he had been here for a long time. It was so long that he almost forgot how long he had been in this world. How long have I been here? Luigi hesitated for a long time before finally saying, The standard time is 67 days. The Star Elf said casually. Then she seemed to have thought of something and added, The standard time you set? Luigi was stunned. He didn't understand what the Star Elf meant. At this time, the Star Elf said, Oh, it's like this. As a planet, our concept of time is different from yours. A day for you might be a breath for us. Okay, the insectoids on the planet have been cleaned up. The Empire's troops are preparing to leave. You can go now. Prepare to leave? Luigi's face was filled with disbelief. If the players wanted to leave, it was still possible. However, the Empire had invested so many resources just for the ores on planet E96. If they didn't gain anything, they wouldn't leave so easily. The Star Elf didn't explain this to Luigi. She just said, You can leave now. If you delay any longer, your ship might not be able to leave. Luigi still wanted to ask something, but the Star Elf raised her hand and sent Luigi and his battleship Adariat out. This time, the situation was the same as when Luigi was dragged into this place. Luigi didn't feel any lag at all. It could be seen that Luigi's strength increased during this time was nothing to the Star Elf. When Luigi finally reacted, he was already at the outermost area of planet E96. At this time, Luigi discovered something that was almost impossible. The Empire's clones were cleaning up the various buildings on planet E96. All the bunkers were dismantled and repackaged. They were then put into the space battleship flying above planet E96. The space battleship that came this time was quite large. The giant space battleship Luigi saw before was like a goldfish meeting a whale compared to this space battleship. Although the pronunciation was the same, the size was completely different. A single space battleship could hold at least 100 of these gigantic battleships that were 1 to 2 kilometers long. However, Luigi can see that there aren't many of these spaceships. When he appeared, there was only one nearby. Luigi estimated that in the past, the Empire probably only had 3 to 5 spaceships. They were here to load up the giant warships and some bunker camps that were difficult to dismantle. Luigi estimated that in the past, they had only come to this planet once. If they missed this opportunity, it would be difficult for Luigi to leave this world even if he wanted to. At the very least, he had no way of piloting his Adariat into space, not to mention returning to the starting point of this great world. At that time, he would not be able to leave this great world. No matter how many benefits he obtained, it would be useless. It was no wonder that the Star Elves would send him out. Before Luigi could finish sighing, he noticed that the Adariat was quickly surrounded. There were at least 6 large warships in the sky surrounding the Adariat. Weapons similar to plasma cannons were aimed at Battleship Island. At the same time, a warning voice sounded. Report your identity. Sandro, an outsider who joined the Empire. Responsible for the defense of C-1023 of planet E96. C-1023? Didn't you go missing on day 69? A voice of distrust came from the giant warship. What do you mean missing? I received orders to go to the bottom of the sea to find the whereabouts of a level 4 insectoid broodmother. I also sent back information and took the initiative to attack a level 4 insectoid broodmother. This is the battle record and the response I received when I reported the information. As Lu Ji spoke, he reported his family's record to the higher-up. From this, it could be seen that the Empire was really strong in some aspects. Lu Ji had just finished speaking and submitted his battle record when they immediately checked the situation. Not bad, we found you, Sandro. Return. Defeated a level 2 insectoid broodmother. Handed over 11 insectoid broodmother eggs. Stopped an insectoid broodmother from migrating once. Found a hidden level 4 insectoid broodmother. And successfully damaged an insectoid broodmother. Complete record. Very good, you can return to the team. By the way, do you have any resources to hand over? Lu Ji was stunned for a moment before he understood. The resources mentioned should be ores and energy sources, as well as some items collected on this planet. Some players came here specifically to search and collect items. They could always find something good. Although they could not fight the insectoids, the Empire could benefit from the items they collected. Moreover, Lu Ji's Adariat was so big that it was impossible for the Empire to miss it. They wanted to see if Lu Ji would be willing to hand it over. If it was just a legendary ship, Lu Ji would have handed it over without hesitation. However, not only was this ship mythical grade, but it had also been strengthened by the Star Elves and processed by Lu Ji for many days. Now that it had become Lu Ji's mobile base, there was no way Lu Ji would hand over such a good thing. Therefore, in the face of such a situation, Lu Ji directly said, "No." Understood. Your ship is a level 4 warship. It needs special transportation. Are you sure? Lu Ji said yes. He realized that the Empire's calculated data seemed to have been deducted a lot. He then understood that the Empire was collecting the transportation fee. Lu Ji estimated that he had used up 1/10 of his family's previous achievements and the resources he had handed over to the higher-ups to transport this ship. It was obvious how expensive the transportation fee was. Then, a detailed list quickly popped up in front of Lu Ji. On the list were the materials and equipment that the Empire could use to trade. There were also some items handed over by the players. It was obvious that the Empire wanted to collect all the battle points before the players left. Of course, there were also players who chose to trade with their own platforms. This was everyone's opinion. Lu Ji glanced at the list and said, "Yes. My goal is to level up." Chapter 434. Under Lu Ji's command, the list in front of him was reduced by more than half. In the following situation, Lu Ji clearly saw the conflict between the players and the Empire. Both sides wanted resources and energy, but the players' goal was quite clear. They wanted to level up, so they would rather use a large amount of resources in exchange for a chance to level up than give those resources to the Empire. Instead, they would use their own battle points to exchange for resources from the Empire for their own growth. It was precisely for this reason that the Empire simply found a way to crack the leveling method and introduced a standard leveling package. And this was using a loophole in the player's platform. In the player's platform, behind each player's faction, there was a spring-like thing. As long as you put in the corresponding amount of energy and resources, you could exchange it for a gem that could be used to level up. In addition to the 3 key levels of 5, 10, and 15, the required resources were divided into 3 levels, 1 to 4, 6 to 9, and 11 to 14. The amount of resources required for each level was the same, and the attributes of the resources were not particular. This was a considerable loophole. The Empire researched for a long time based on this loophole and finally came up with a standard leveling material for all classes and levels. The materials needed to level up from level 3 to level 4 were definitely different from the materials needed from level 2 to level 3. For the players, as long as they could level up and it was cheaper, they were naturally willing to exchange their battle points with the Empire. Lu Ji glanced at the list given by the Empire. His battle points were not bad. He discovered and severely injured a level 4 mother nest, which made him a lot of points. Level 4 mother nests corresponded to players between level 10 and 12. According to the principle of players getting half of the loot after defeating a level 4 mother nest, if Lu Ji really killed a level 4 mother nest, he should be able to get a level 8 to level 9 leveling material. However, Lu Ji only discovered and severely injured a level 4 mother nest, so he didn't get much. Based on this calculation, Lu Ji could get a level 5 to 6 leveling material. If Lu Ji chose a class, the level of this leveling material could be increased even more. However, the Empire also knew the requirements of the player's platform, so they were the same as the player's platform. Each player could only exchange for one Tanaris desert at a time. Above his head, Elun was benevolently blooming with her light. Blue Child was unwilling to be left out. In a corner of the night, he also opened his eyes and looked at Azeroth. In the desert under the moonlight, a bonfire was lit in a large campsite. Tens of thousands of people were resting there. Although it was a little chaotic, order was still maintained. It was a tall figure. Standing at the edge of the camp, Elun looked at the sky in silence. Suddenly, a tall but stooped figure approached the tall but straight figure. He bowed respectfully and said in a low voice, "Sir, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. Chieftain, we are already at the entrance of Ungoro Crater. Does the tribe really want to go inside? Apart from all kinds of tyrannosauruses, violent elements, and violent life forms, there's nothing there. Zanger, this is the will of the great Loa, and we will only attract the attention of the Sand Fury in Tanaris. Although they were both desert trolls, Sand Fury would not be merciful. We don't need their mercy. Now that we are weak, we can only choose to leave. But I left for a more glorious return." The tall figure did not even turn his head as he interrupted the subordinate named Zanger. Only his deep voice echoed in the air. "Ungoro Crater, it is indeed very dangerous. But this is the will of the Loa, and we cannot go against the will of the god. Zanger, what you can do is what you must do. Help me guide the tribe, let everyone be at ease, and strive to enter the crater tomorrow." The slightly stooped figure heard the tall figure speak so decisively. He bowed slightly again and said softly, "Loa's will, your glory. Chieftain, I will go check on the campsite. The wind in the desert at night is a little strong. I hope those little bastards can make the tent stronger. Go." After the slightly stooped figure left, the tall figure who had been staring at Elun in the sky turned his head and looked at the campsite below. If one stood in front of him at this time, because the moonlight was too bright. With the moonlight behind him, his face could not be seen clearly. But the tall and strong muscles, the iconic blue and white skin of the desert trolls, and the dazzling red short hair all proved that this was a powerful desert troll. He was indeed a desert troll. His name was Tonashu Aztec, and he was the chieftain of the desert troll Sandblood tribe. The Sandblood trolls were one of the many desert trolls in the great desert of Tanaris. When it came to the trolls of the Tanaris desert, the only ones the world knew were the Sand Fury trolls of Zul'Farrak. But in fact, although the Sand Fury trolls were one of the largest forces of the desert trolls, they also occupied the only troll city in the desert. But below the Sand Fury tribe, there were still a dozen other desert troll tribes with an uncertain number of people. Their numbers ranged from thousands to tens of thousands, and the Sand Fury tribe had a population of more than 100,000. Other than the Sand Fury tribe, the Sandblood tribe was one of the larger tribes among the dozen or so desert trolls. Originally, they were all desert trolls and were basically related by blood. Although they were not close, they were still okay. But a few years ago, the Sand Fury tribe in Zul'Farrak suddenly wanted to unify all the desert trolls. They gave orders to the other tribes that were not Sand Fury trolls to either submit to Sand Fury or die. In the future, there would only be Sand Fury in Tanaris, and no other desert troll tribes. In fact, most of the desert trolls would be willing to move to Zul-Farak. After all, other than the Goblin City, Zul-Farak was the only place suitable for living in Tanaris. But it was said that the news from Zul-Farak claimed that the important people in the city wanted to unify all the desert trolls and establish a new troll empire, and at the same time march to the north. Why not the south? Because other than sand, there were only on-Karaj bugmen and beasts in the crater in the south of Tanaris. This was a good thing for the desert trolls. After all, no one really wanted to stay in a barren desert with nothing. If they could live in the north, everyone would be happy. For example, it was said that everywhere was a barren grassland suitable for hunting beasts, or the Grey Valley with towering trees but a bunch of black long-ears. However, things were not that simple. Zul-Farak's order was that the strong trolls could enter the city, but the old, the weak, women, and children could only stay outside the city. They were not even allowed to leave the city, and could only stay in the original territory of the desert trolls. Sand Fury only wanted strong warriors, or strong desert troll cannon fodder. Of course, the other desert trolls were not willing. They claimed that either Sand Fury would change his mind and accept everyone, or they would not be able to recruit their warriors. Then, a civil war broke out among the desert trolls in Tanaris. Chapter 435. However, lying on the bed, Reynolds, who usually met with Zhou Gong almost immediately, had insomnia. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. The campus was exceptionally quiet tonight, but the atmosphere was as oppressive as the calm before the storm, making it hard for people to breathe. Starting tomorrow, he would step onto the arena. If he could enter the finals, he would have to show his true strength in front of thousands of people. After a few dreamlike months, Reynolds couldn't believe that he could integrate into this world so quickly. His dreams and goals would all be set on a new starting point tomorrow. On the big stage of King's Mainland, he would no longer be a spectator. Reynolds thought of a famous saying on Earth, "Let the storm come more violently." When Reynolds opened his eyes again, he felt refreshed. His fatigue had been swept away. Whether it was his strength or confidence, they seemed to have climbed to an unprecedented peak. This was the effect of getting just enough rest after a long period of training to improve one's state. If he had trained bitterly until he was half dead from exhaustion on the last day, or if he had stopped a few days ago to rest, the effect would not have been so good. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he ran into Aaron. Reynolds smiled and said, "Shijun, how are your preparations?" Aaron knew that if she didn't reveal her true strength, she could only fight until the second grade at most, because most of the skills of a magician were supplemented by incantations. Aaron was a magic genius. She could use low and middle-level magic skills without incantations. She could pass them off as magic dochi, but she couldn't use higher-level magic skills. Her own magic dochi had also reached a certain level, but compared to the magic she was best at, it was still far inferior. Aaron felt some regret, but at the same time, she didn't feel any psychological burden. Shrugging her shoulders, she said indifferently, "So, I guess I can barely squeeze into the finals." "Reynolds, what about you, how do you feel?" Reynolds said proudly, "I'm in a great state right now. Those who block my way, the men are all killed. The women are all, Ace's adoration. Chains, whips, candles, collars, shackles, blindfolds, ropes, not a single one is missing." Aaron's hair stood on end as she listened. It was easy to imagine a terrifying scene when those nouns were connected. She also somewhat understood the meaning of Ace's adoration from her weirdo roommate. She secretly cursed him for being a pervert. However, her roommate, who usually kept a low profile, was uncharacteristically arrogant and domineering today, as if she had taken drugs. She was somewhat puzzled. Which stage of the competition do you think we can reach? Reynolds chuckled and said, I reckon he'll make it to the knockout round. Erin rolled her eyes. How could you be so humble? The first day of the internal selection wasn't a direct confrontation between students. Instead, it was more like a test. It was mainly based on attack power, defense, and speed. The attack data was still based on the equipment, while the defense and speed were both analyzed by specialized instructors. The students' endurance and dodging ability were evaluated based on the students' endurance and dodging ability. Finally, the total score of a certain student was obtained by combining the data from the three major aspects. In the past, only the top 20 students in the lower classes had the chance to pass the internal selection. The probability was very low. However, this year, for some reason, the two academies negotiated a major adjustment and doubled the number. There were 40 students in each lower class, which meant that 1 out of every 2 or 3 students would be able to pass. This was very encouraging news. It meant that everyone would have an easier chance to perform and hone themselves. In the end, the one with the most outstanding results in Reynolds' class was still Green Eye, a girl with wood element Do-Chi from the Lord of the Forest clan. She was different from Reynolds, who planned to hide his strength and bide his time, not revealing his true strength, and then viciously eat up his opponent who looked down on him during the competition. The Lord of the Forest clan was mostly straightforward and didn't play any tricks. She was definitely the third strongest student in the class. First, it was Reynolds, the only disciple of Dean Rudolph, and then there was Irene, the genius young witch, who was also in the class. Even if she combined her half-baked magic combat chi with her fake magic, her strength was still above Qingtong's. However, the top 2 students only achieved inconspicuous results. Erin was 11th. This number wasn't much, at least it was difficult for others to associate it with her real identity. Reynolds was even lower. He was 23rd. It was needless to say that Reynolds was a cunning person who pretended to be weak. As a matter of fact, in terms of attack and defense, Elena was no match for him even if she used her full strength. In terms of dodging, after being trained by Randolph, a powerful warrior, Erin would definitely be better than Reynolds in terms of defense and dodging. The first day of the internal test passed by peacefully. The 40 students who passed the test were all excellent students. Reynolds had failed the first test, but he had learned his lesson. He was already good at using his spiritual power, and under Randolph's guidance, he was even better. Therefore, he was able to maintain his ranking between the top 20 and the top 30 in the test. Before the end of the internal test, there was one more important thing to do, a drawing lot. In order to make it to the final stage of the school competition, other than strength, sometimes it also required a certain amount of luck. Drawing lots was one of the factors that determined one's luck. If you were lucky, you might be able to fight against a few relatively weak rookies in the knockout round and make it to the finals. If you were unlucky, you might fight against a freak like the Witch of the Black Mountain in the first round of drawing lot. Then, you would have to walk out of the competition with your tail between your legs and become a spectator. Therefore, when drawing lots, almost all of them were praying for the blessing of the god of luck. Then, they put their hands into the small wooden box and took out their paper, as if they were taking out a verdict. Reynolds and Erin stood in the queue and looked at the expressions of the students in front of them. Some of them were happy, some of them were depressed, and some of them were neither happy nor sad. Of course, Erin was not afraid. However, it was strange that Reynolds was not nervous at all. She asked, "Reynolds, aren't you worried at all?" Reynolds asked curiously, "Worried about what? Are you talking about the lack of pretty girls in this year's batch? Don't worry. I'm so handsome. How could I not have some fangirls chasing after me?" Erin interrupted him. "I'm talking about the drawing lots. What are you thinking about?" She thought to herself, "Which part of you is handsome? Why can't I see it?" Chapter 436. Oh, that's what you're talking about. Shijun, didn't I tell you many times that we have to be clear when we speak? Elena was so angry that she almost fainted. She had been bitten by Reynolds several times. She still couldn't accept her roommate's unconventional thinking. Reynolds patted his chest and said, "Don't worry. I've always been lucky. I've never failed to win a lottery." Reynolds wasn't wrong. However, he had only won 2 lottery tickets. The first prize was a lighter worth 1 yuan. The second prize was a pack of tissues. He hadn't earned back his money yet. Oh, is that so? Elena was skeptical. Just watch. You'll know soon enough. Not long after, it was the 2 people's turn. After taking out the paper, the 2 of them found a place to open it. Wahahaha! Reynolds suddenly burst out laughing. Elena was startled. The rest of the class also looked at him. Elena moved closer and asked, "Reynolds, what are you laughing about? Did you draw a weak opponent?" The name on the paper was Chong, an Academy's martial arts class, Year 1, Class 3, Washlaki. Reynolds couldn't stop laughing. "I'm trash. I know he's a newbie just by hearing his name. I'll teach him a lesson," he said arrogantly, one word at a time. "Battles are cruel. Ha 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 ha." He was overjoyed when he thought about how he could bully someone like Washlaki. Reynolds pretended to be proud when he saw the rest of the class staring at him. "Don't look at me like that. It's different when you have a good character." "Ha." Elena patted his shoulder and sighed. "Bro, be careful." One of the Magic Knights, Donald, said, "Reynolds, this Washlaki is the 6th student in Randolph's entrance exam. His strength and unique characteristics made him a unique wood-type devil path genius." Reynolds asked in surprise, "Really?" Donald nodded again. The rest of the class sighed and expressed their sympathy. They had all seen Renault's dazzling performance in the test. His overall attack power was only a pitiful 20, and he had met such a strong opponent in the first round. However, with this kind of strength, he would lose no matter who he met. Reynolds smiled in a carefree manner, indicating that he didn't mind. However, he was constantly complaining in his heart. Experts would usually have names that were extraordinary. For example, Yang Dingtian, Zhang Genshua, Dongfang Bubi, or at least Zhao Meng, Wang Hu, or something like that. How could it be called, "I'm trash"? It seemed that the world of kings couldn't be compared to Earth after all. Due to the large number of people participating in the competition, there were only 60 to 70,000 people left after the internal selection in the past. However, this time, the number of people participating in the lower classes had increased to 40, reaching 100,000 people. If everyone were to compete in the same venue, it was estimated that they wouldn't be able to finish the competition even after the freshmen had graduated. Therefore, the Academy distributed the number of people participating in the elimination round to many small training grounds within the 2 academies. Renault was lucky enough to be assigned to the 46th venue of the knockout round, which was also the 4th training ground of Randolph Martial Arts Academy. He had the home advantage. Although the venue was scattered, when Renault arrived at his own arena, he was still shocked by the atmosphere. Although it was called a small training ground, it was actually only relatively speaking. In fact, it was almost the size of a football field on Earth. If it was small, it would be impossible to move freely. It was estimated that he would have to run out of the venue after a few moves. At a glance, the stands around the training ground were densely packed with people. There were at least a few thousand people, and all the seats were full. For an elimination round, this number was very exaggerated. The reason was that Washlaki, the powerful guy who ranked 8th in the freshman assessment of Chong, an academy, was also participating in his first battle in this venue. The battle between the strong always attracted a lot of attention, which was also the reason why the 46th venue was so crowded. After all, Renault was also someone who had seen big scenes, so he wasn't surprised by such a shocking scene. As Aaron and his class were not in the same class, the two of them were very far apart, which made Renaud a little unhappy. Aaron's battle was in the afternoon, and she also came to support Renaud. Although she didn't think it was a big deal, the gap between the two of them was too big. Before the battle started, the venue was already very noisy. Everyone was discussing the big shots of this year's Grand Assembly, each year, and even the popular champion of the entire competition. The situation of Randolph Martial Arts Academy was not optimistic, because everyone knew that there hadn't been any top talents in the past few years. Although they were very discouraged, the students' comments were not blind. Who do you think will be the champion of this 5-year competition, which is also the final? Leon, a 5-year student of Diabolism Academy, the Dark Dominator and also the Grand Knight. He was the runner-up in the last Grand Assembly. The defending champion mage, Garfield, is said to have some problems in his cultivation, and he can't break through the bottleneck. I think he will have to give up his seat. Who do you think is more powerful among the new students of Diabolism Academy? I think there's someone called Erin who is very powerful, and she has shown great talent. That's right. She's also very beautiful. She's also the best in that special class. Really? Why haven't I seen her before? When he heard them talking about Erin, Reynolds felt a sense of pride. At this moment, an earth-shattering sound wave came from the contestants' entrance, and then a fanatical shout of a certain name spread throughout the venue. Reynolds's heart skipped a beat, and he came back to his senses. He asked Erin, "What's wrong, who is it?" Erin smiled and said, "Reynolds, it's your coquettish opponent." A human youth walked out of the contestants' aisle amidst the cheers of the crowd. He walked very slowly, as if he was enjoying the cheers and admiration of the crowd. He had a very proud expression on his face, and one of his hands even reached out to wave at the crowd, looking very much like a leader inspecting his subordinate. His armor was very gorgeous, and it was studded with sparkling gems everywhere. It was very beautiful, but in fact, it was useless. It only added to the weight. This was Vashlaki, and according to the rumors, he was a person who liked to show off, even more than the rumors said. Reynolds was also dumbfounded. He had been looking forward to this opponent's performance because of his reputation, but now he only felt that this opponent was a little funny, and his nervousness was swept away. Erin was also a little embarrassed. "This is your opponent? Why does he look like a clown?" Chapter 437. Reynolds smiled and said, "You can't judge a book by its cover. Look at me, I seem very ordinary. I'm just an awesome master." Reynolds would have to show his strength in a while anyway. He wasn't afraid of exposing himself in front of Eileen so that she could be mentally prepared. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to accept it. Eileen pretended to snort, but she was still looking forward to it. She said, "Don't lose then." Reynolds put his hand on her shoulder and said, "How about this, little Shijun? Let's make a bet. If I can beat him, what will you do?" Eileen snorted and said, "If you can beat him, I'll do whatever you want." She felt that no matter how much this guy hid his strength, it would be unreasonable if he could beat the 6th best in the Martial Arts Academy's freshman assessment. Reynolds smiled and said, "How about this, if I can beat him, you'll let me take a bath with you." "Brother, why do you always take so long to take a bath? It takes at least an hour. By the time you're done, I'll be moldy." Girls always took a long bath, and Eileen was a very clean girl. She was even a little bit of a clean freak, so she spent a long time in the bathroom every time. Of course, she couldn't agree to this condition. It was better to be safe than sorry. If Reynolds really got lucky and won the competition, then it would be troublesome. Eileen blushed and said, "No, this bet has to be excluded." Reynolds said, Hey, you just said you could do whatever you want." Eileen didn't know how to respond. She secretly hated herself for being so harsh. Fortunately, a girl's voice came to her rescue. "Little Lin," Eileen quickly floated over with a fragrant wind. There were a few girls behind her. They seemed to be her friends. "You're here." Reynolds was stunned when he saw her. Then, a happy and surprised expression appeared on his face. He hurriedly got up and welcomed her to his seat. Every contestant could get 3 tickets to cheer for them. It was impossible for Irene to miss Renault's debut match. Her demonic path warlock class was still quite easy for the time being. She was publicly recognized as a powerhouse along with Charm Master, Dominator, and several other special combat classes. According to the rules, she could directly enter the finals and didn't need to participate in the internal selection or elimination round. After living in the academy and undergoing a long period of training, Erin had grown prettier by the day. The delicate and cute girl on the train had now become a devastatingly beautiful woman. Her cheeks were healthy and rosy, and her originally delicate skin was even more tender and tender. Her young and inexperienced figure was also gradually becoming curvaceous. Due to Irene's appearance, the gazes of many male animals shifted from Aelowitz to Reynolds. Apart from her sorcerer's attire, her pure and lovely appearance could not be ignored. Unfortunately, the beauty was already taken. She was snuggled up to a man, and they were greatly disappointed. Looking at the envious gazes of the surrounding people, Reynolds was extremely proud. To be able to have such an obedient beauty, no man could not help but feel proud. Irene cheered for Reynolds. "Good luck, little Lin." She also knew that Aelowitz was a very famous freshman in the academy. However, she believed that even she had become very powerful through learning and cultivation. When she separated from Reynolds, he must have encountered many opportunities. He must be much stronger than she was. Irene's appearance was undoubtedly a boost to Reynolds's confidence. He laughed and said, "No problem. Just wait and see how I perform." His confidence was greatly boosted. With Irene here, he had to win no matter what. The girls who came with Irene saw this and couldn't help but ask, "I was wondering why Arling wasn't moved by the pursuit of those handsome guys in the academy. Turns out she already has someone in her heart." When Irene heard this, she smiled embarrassedly. Reynolds and Eileen also smiled and greeted them. They all sat down. Eileen saw that Reynolds was full of confidence and thought to herself, "This roommate of mine is really a simple-minded animal. If he had a few more beauties to encourage him, he would probably beat his chest and challenge a powerhouse like Randolph." Not long after, the curtains of the competition officially opened. First, a host teacher from each academy announced the rules. If one side automatically admitted defeat or lost the ability to move, it would be considered a loss. If one side fell out of the arena more than 5 times or stayed outside for more than 10 seconds, it would also be considered a loss. Pets were not allowed to fight, and any weapons or martial arts were allowed. Everyone will be provided with 3 recovery pills and 2 spiritual energy pills of the same effect, and will stop when they are used up. The deadline for each battle was 10 minutes. If the winner was not decided after the time limit, the scores would be assessed by a dozen judges. The one with the highest total score would qualify for the next round of the elimination round. The front row of the audience had already set up a layer of transparent barrier around the arena to prevent the battle from getting too intense and affecting the fish in the moat. After the rules were announced, the host teacher didn't say much, and the match immediately began. There were several large light element mirrors above the venue that accurately reflected the details of the contestants' movements from various angles to the audience. There were also sound wave amplifiers that amplified the sound of the 2 contestants fighting. There were also commentators present to report the situation in real time. The first 2 contestants were magic warriors with similar rankings in their respective academies. They were both of the warrior type, and even their magic do-chi was of the fire element. They were evenly matched, so the battle was very intense. In the end, the Magic Path Academy's side won by a bit. They used up all 5 of the opponent's pills and then launched the final attack. Although the damage wasn't great, the opponent was like a lamp without oil and had no strength to get up again. This battle couldn't be said to be brilliant, but it was fierce. The battle lasted until the last moment before the winner was decided. In addition, it was the first battle, so it won a lot of cheers. The Martial Path Academy's student who lost didn't lose much face. Although they lost, they still had glory. The second match was a bit boring. The Martial Path Academy's student was a hunter ranked 8th in his class, while the Magic Path Academy's student was a magic archer ranked 40th. They took the last bus to the elimination round. With such a great disparity in strength, the outcome was quickly decided. The Martial Path Academy managed to salvage the situation. The maximum time a match could last was 10 minutes. In fact, there weren't many matches that could last until that time. The freshmen' spiritual energy was too low, and they were generally impulsive. As soon as they went on stage, they would immediately attack with all their strength. Their spiritual energy and vitality would be rapidly consumed. A few pills wouldn't be enough to support them for long. After a few hours, Reynolds and his friends were watching the matches with great interest. They chatted from time to time and made comments on the students. They were really happy. Chapter 438. At this time, Reynolds looked at the ranking of the contestants and knew that it was almost his turn, so he said goodbye to Shijun and Lin Ling and walked off the stage. "Little Lin, you have to win." Looking at Lin Ling and Shijun's encouragement, Reynolds smiled and waved his hand. The match began. Reynolds walked onto the stage and found that he was facing thousands of people, but he was not nervous at all. Ailowitz also walked onto the stage in a very flashy manner. His appearance immediately set off a climax in the venue. Many people were shouting his name, and even the students of the Demon Academy were not stingy with their praise. The strong were always the most respected on the continent, and Reynolds did not have any reputation in the academy, let alone in the academy. Only a few students who were more passionate about the school selflessly gave their encouragement, and the loudest cheers were Shijun and Lin Ling. The two hugged to show their friendship, and Reynolds pretended to be admiring him and whispered, "Student Ailowitz, I've heard a lot about you. When the time comes, please go easy on me so that I won't lose so badly." Ailowitz was enjoying the cheers of the crowd, and he said proudly, "That won't do. Student Reynolds, I have to tell you something. Battles are cruel. Wahahaha." After he said that, he immediately burst into laughter. Reynolds rolled his eyes. Why did this line sound so familiar? Why did he feel like he had heard it somewhere before? The commentator immediately said, "Student Ailowitz, a strong fighter from the Martial Arts Academy, has shown his high fighting spirit. Before the battle began, he had shown his absolute confidence with his laughter. But I have to say that Student Ailowitz's voice is indeed not very good. It makes people shudder. I boldly guess that this is probably one of his sure-kill skills. I don't know if Student Reynolds, who will bear the brunt of this attack, can withstand the first wave of fierce attacks. Even I can't stand it outside the arena." The commentator's humor caused a burst of laughter. Ailowitz quickly stopped laughing and did not dare to make a sound. The two sides separated by 20 meters, and then the referee announced, "Match, begin." As soon as the referee finished speaking, Ailowitz immediately used the light body technique and rushed forward. It seemed that he also heard that Reynolds was not a good opponent and wanted to defeat him in the shortest time possible to regain his lost face. Reynolds had already placed a long sword behind him. Seeing Ailowitz's rapid attack, Reynolds did not panic in the face of danger. With a whoosh, he instantly cast Lighten. The two converged. On the field, an intense battle had officially begun. Pa! Ding ding dang dang! The sound of weapons clashing and the sound of flesh colliding rang out incessantly. green power surged out of Alowitz's hand, and a spirit snake crawled out of his palm, darting toward Reynolds while flicking its forked tongue. Reynolds jumped back. He had already determined Alowitz's strength. After all, with Randolph's guidance, Reynolds's progress was extremely fast. Thinking of this, Reynolds used the fire element spiritual power he learned in class to enchant the long sword. Suddenly, the sword edge flashed with a threatening, scorching aura. At this time, the commentator began to report again. We all know that the fire element has a great restraining effect on the wood element. Student Alowitz is a smart person. I think he will use the vitality of the wood element to temporarily avoid the attack, and then attack from an unexpected direction. No, he's actually using brute force. Due to the vitality of the wood element, it was relatively easy to control its flying ability. However, compared to a mage's ability to control it, there was still a big gap. Alowitz laughed in his heart and continued to move forward. At the same time, he continued to send out 4 spirit snakes from his palms. This time, they were from Reynolds's left, right, top, and bottom. He seemed to have a well-thought-out plan. The spirit snake in the middle would definitely not be able to defend against it. The wood element and fire element spiritual power finally made contact, but it was not the wood element that was defeated. The flames on Reynolds's long sword were quickly extinguished. Then, the long sword and the green wood element spiritual power collided, and green smoke quickly came out of the sword due to the high temperature. The commentator immediately exclaimed in surprise, "Look, what a magical scene! The wood element is actually stronger than the fire element and easily restrains the sword. Student Alowitz's wood element combat energy must be very special. This is really a wonderful battle. There was almost no prelude, and it has entered a small climax." Reynolds looked at the long sword in his hand that was burning hot and couldn't help but sigh. It seemed that Alowitz's skill also had a strong corrosive effect. Fortunately, his sword was not an ordinary sword. It was Dean Randolph's sword. Although he had a little bit of elemental power, it was only for show. In a real battle, it was not very useful. Alowitz saw this and said with a surprised expression, "I didn't expect your sword to be so tough." Reynolds smiled and didn't say anything. He was a bit impressed by Alowitz's strength. "Are you sure you don't want to use a weapon?" Reynolds looked at him and said. Alowitz shook his head as a strange smile flashed across his face. "You should worry about yourself first." Reynolds was startled. He just realized that Alowitz's wood element spirit force didn't dissipate. Instead, it wrapped around his sword like maggots. Looking at the green energy that was spreading over, it continued to wrap around Reynolds in a tricky manner. At this moment, Alowitz's 4 spirit force snakes also took effect and blocked his escape route. The only thing Reynolds could do was retreat. This was something that Alowitz had already expected. He immediately used light body technique and controlled the spirit force snakes to follow. No matter how Reynolds retreated, he couldn't shake them off. Most people who cultivated wood element would focus on light body technique. First, wood element combat energy didn't have strong defense. They had to dodge often instead of taking the opponent's attacks head-on. Secondly, a powerful light body technique could be used in conjunction with its characteristics to attack, making it more effective. Alowitz's move was called Shadow Pursuit. Once the opponent was entangled by his aura, it would be very difficult to escape. The opponent would have to fight with his spirit force. Alowitz's spirit force was also very famous, extreme corrosion. In addition to corroding spirit force, it could also corrode physical objects. It was a very powerful move. Although Alowitz liked to be in the limelight, his strength was unquestionable. Although Reynolds was very strong, he did not have much combat experience. Seeing this, he was slightly panicked. However, in the next moment, he calmed down and infused all his spiritual energy into his sword, attaching all his strength to his right arm. The commentator said, Our student Reynolds chose to fight head-on under Alowitz's fierce attacks. Look, he is gathering power. Chapter 439. Seeing this, Alowitz sensed that Reynolds was gathering more and more power. He was shocked, but he didn't panic. He filled his body with wood spirit force and formed a gray shield. The commentator exclaimed, "Oh my God, there's always someone better. Student Alowitz has already learned body protection spirit force. He's just a freshman. Too strong." Body protection spirit force is a kind of shield, but it can be released through the whole body and not limited to the hand. It's one of the most difficult techniques and consumes a lot of spirit force. It seems that Alowitz is quite confident in his attack and thinks he can take down Reynolds in one hit. That's why he's willing to use body protection spirit force. Clearly, Alowitz was determined to meet Reynolds' attack head-on. He charged at Reynolds like a raging bull with a thunderous aura. Reynolds didn't want to waste his energy, but he couldn't do anything to Alowitz. He could only continue to retreat. In less than a minute since the start of the match, the audience had already seen the fierce attack skills, the brilliant light body technique, and the difficult protective spiritual energy. They all felt that this trip was worth it, and it was an eye-opener. Seeing that Reynolds could only retreat and couldn't fight back, they shouted excitedly, "Alowitz, Alowitz, take him down! Take him down!" At this moment, even Avina was a bit worried. She didn't know why Reynolds was in such a sorry state, but she was more confident in Reynolds because of the inexplicable promise. Alowitz heard the cheers of the audience and became more spirited. Reynolds was soon forced to the edge of the venue. Alowitz's eyes flashed with pride, and he shouted, "Spirit snake trap the dragon." Another 6 wood elemental spirit snakes flew out from his hands, splitting into different directions to block off all possible escape routes for Reynolds. There were even some that came from behind and circled towards Reynolds. The commentator saw the climax and quickly explained, "It's here. Alowitz's ultimate skill, a spirit snake trap the dragon. Reynolds is in big trouble." Alowitz laughed and said, "He lose." He remained calm and allowed the 11 spirit snakes to attack on their own. After releasing so many flying skills, he couldn't control them anymore. At this moment, Reynolds suddenly smiled strangely. He quickly raised the long sword in his hand and injected spirit force into his right arm. It's useless. Alowitz didn't care about Reynolds at all, because before Reynolds could hit him, his spirit snake trap the dragon would hit Reynolds first. Moreover, his lightning technique could completely dodge Reynolds's attack. Storm displacement. Reynolds instantly disappeared from the spot. What? Alowitz was shocked. He saw that his skill missed, but there was no trace of Reynolds. After he reacted, he quickly enchanted all the spirit snake power on his back. While Alowitz was shocked, Reynolds had already appeared behind him. The sword energy that he had been accumulating for a long time struck Alowitz's back heavily. He smiled and said, "Get down, Alowitz." Fortunately, he had enchanted a large amount of protective spirit force, but even so, his body was still sent flying out of the venue uncontrollably. The situation suddenly changed, and the venue was dead silent. No one thought that Alowitz, who had the absolute advantage a second ago, would fall out of the venue in the next moment. No one thought why the spirit snake, which was so corrosive, didn't work on Reynolds. Avina heaved a sigh of relief and clapped her hands. Only the referee, who was used to this scene, was clear-headed. He immediately said, "Alowitz, fall out of the arena once." He began to count down. 1, 2. Alowitz, who fell to the ground, was furious. After adjusting the balance of his spirit force, he immediately got up and jumped to the arena 3 meters high. He released the spirit snake in his hand again. This time there was only one, but it was twice as big as before. The green gas was thicker, and he didn't believe that his ultimate corrosion couldn't be compared to a sword. But this time, he miscalculated again. The sword energy mercilessly shattered his spirit snake and then landed on Alowitz's chest. This unlucky guy was sent flying out of the arena again before he could land on the stage. 4, 5. The referee was still dutifully counting the time outside the arena. As long as the contestant didn't step back on the stage, their time wouldn't be reset. Alowitz wasn't just angry this time. The spirit snake was almost at the limit of his spirit force, but it still couldn't corrode the longsword. It wouldn't work if he continued to fight. Although it was embarrassing, Alowitz still decided to dodge first. He was confident that his lightness technique was much better than his opponent's. Alowitz immediately jumped out of the arena. 2 seconds later, he felt that he should have shaken off that annoying guy and jumped back onto the stage. However, before he landed on the stage, he immediately saw Reynolds waiting for him. Reynolds looked at him with a smile and raised his sword. Once again, Alowitz was unable to enter. He almost fainted. This guy's light body technique is very strong, but he has been hiding it. The commentator saw some clues. I know. Reynolds's tactic is to use the rules to keep Alowitz out of the arena for 10 seconds and win. Alowitz doesn't want to be outdone and wants to go up, but Reynolds won't let him. The people in the arena were shocked by his ambiguous commentary. The feeling of watching a movie was more intense than watching a battle. 8, 9. There was only 1 second left. Alowitz was very anxious and quickly swallowed all 5 pills. Then, he jumped back onto the stage and released another wave of spirit snakes. This time, there were 15 spirit snakes, which was Alowitz's limit. He also covered his body with spirit force. Everyone could see that he wanted to fight to the death. This time, even the commentator was so nervous that he didn't say anything. He just watched the last attack. There were too many snakes, and they were all coming from different directions. Reynolds's sword energy had a small range, so he could only destroy 6 of the snakes in front of him and dodge 7. The remaining 2 still drilled into his body from tricky angles. However, the sword chi that Reynolds had missed also landed on Alowitz's chest at the same time. 10. When Alowitz landed on the ground, the referee also counted down the last seconds, but he did not announce the result. This was because Alowitz's last attack had also hit his opponent. If his opponent was incapacitated, this match could only be considered a draw. Alowitz also smiled. He knew that with the power of his spirit snakes, it was very likely that the match would be a draw. But when he looked at the arena, his eyes almost fell out. Reynolds was still standing steadily and waving at a certain direction with a smile. It was Avina and Irene's direction. Chapter 440. Winner Reynolds. Even though the match was not long, the skills and adaptability of the 2 contestants were top-notch. The audience burst into thunderous applause. Iwena was very happy and kept clapping and cheering for Reynolds. Irene sighed helplessly. She did not expect her roommate to win the match, but she had to believe it when she saw him standing on the stage like a winner. The commentator made the final report. This was an exciting match. Washlaki's corrosive attack, flying skill, body protection, and lightness technique are not to be underestimated. Reynolds, on the other hand, was smart and daring. He used a trick to lure his opponent to the edge of the arena. Then, he used his exquisite positioning and powerful sword chi to force Washlaki to not be able to step onto the arena for 10 seconds. From there, he turned the tables around and won. This was a battle where the weak defeated the strong. No, it should be said that it was a battle where the strong met the strong. This was because Reynolds was unharmed even after being hit by 2 spiritual energy snakes, which meant that he was also a strong person. Also, the sword he used wasn't corroded at all. I still don't understand what's going on. Reynolds shook his head. His sword was Dean Randolph. How could it be damaged so easily? Washlaki jumped back on the stage and said dejectedly, "Reynolds, you won. He did not expect to lose in the first round of the knockout round. Reynolds said humbly, "It's nothing. I just used a little trick. I hope you don't mind." Washlaki forced a smile and said, "Reynolds, a loss is a loss. A win is a win. Strategies are also a part of a battle. Also, if the battle went on for a long time, I would be the one to lose. When I saw that the last two spiritual energy snakes could not hurt you at all, I knew that you were hiding your true strength. I'm not your opponent, so I'm convinced." Reynolds thought to himself. Even though Washlaki liked to show off, he was a straightforward person. He did not try to push the blame to others. Not bad. Thus, Renaud took the initiative to step forward and hug him. The battle thus ended amicably and satisfactorily. Their appreciation of each other, their demeanor of not being arrogant in victory and not being irritable in defeat, won waves of enthusiastic applause from the crowd. This was a competition in the true sense of the word. Everyone was doing their best, but they were not hostile to each other like life and death rivals. "Reynolds, I'm convinced today, but that doesn't mean I'll be convinced forever. I'll learn from this lesson and continue to practice my martial arts so that I can compete with you again in the future," Washlaki said. Washlaki's change from Mr. Reynolds to Mr. Reynolds showed that he had developed a respect for his opponent. Reynolds smiled and said, "Sure, everyone will learn from each other. Only then will there be improvements. I'll definitely defeat you in the next tournament." Wahahahaha. Washlaki laughed as he walked away. He wasn't the kind of person who couldn't recover from a setback. After making up his mind, he immediately regained his confidence. It was as if he could already see Renaud being defeated by him. At first, Reynolds was worried that someone who liked to be in the limelight like him would inevitably feel down after suffering a defeat, so he wanted to comfort him. But now, it seemed that his thoughts were completely unnecessary. This person's degree of optimism far exceeded his imagination. The crowd looked at Reynolds differently now. They were full of respect and envy. Everyone had thought that he would be Washlaki's first sacrifice, a cannon fodder. Reynolds could feel pride growing in him, but he quickly suppressed it. Pride was a human's greatest enemy. If it's pride, then it's fine. Reynolds convinced himself and walked towards Iwina and Irene with pride and coquettishness. He was confident that he could end the battle in an instant if he fought head-on. However, this was his first match, and he was in front of Iwina. Reynolds didn't just need confidence, he needed to look cool. In the end, he chose the safer and more shameless way of fighting. "Little Lin, you're so strong." Iwina ran over with a smile on her face. She was like a beauty welcoming a victorious hero, and the audience was more or less the same as the cheering commoners. This feeling made Reynolds very comfortable, and he started to feel complacent. "My Ling is my goddess. With you here, how could I lose?" This was a match that was extremely useful in stirring up the atmosphere of the stadium. The cheers had reached a boiling point, and the hosting teacher had specially delayed the next match by a few minutes. This was the privilege of the strong. Irene almost vomited from Reynolds's mushy words. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. Irene said to Reynolds, "That's definitely not your true strength. You're probably stronger than that." Reynolds thought to himself. Of course he was strong, being taught by someone like Randolph. So he smiled and said, "Of course, you'll see in the next match." Reynolds seemed to remember something. "Oh right, I remember we made a bet. Now that I win, I get to bathe in dragon and tiger baths, right?" Irene quickly denied it. Hey, I said I wouldn't bet." Reynolds said seriously. "How can a man go back on his words?" Irene almost fainted. This guy's ability to twist right and wrong was extraordinary. Irene angrily grabbed a rookie student behind her. "Hey you, sit behind us. You heard what I said, right? I said I wouldn't bet." The rookie was originally timid, but after being frightened by this sudden turn of events, he was on the verge of tears. I didn't hear anything," Reynolds laughed and said, "Brother Shijun, I was just joking with you." Did you really take it seriously? Didn't I say it already? It's okay for us men to be weak. The most important thing is to be strong and immortal. Irene and the rookie behind her were about to cry. It wasn't that she was weak, it was that she didn't have any strength at all. Irene prayed sincerely. God, please don't torture me, okay? She was the only one in the family who played pranks on others. She had never fallen to this point. Avina's face reddened when she heard the explicit conversation between the two. She was cursing the pervert in her mind. He's getting more and more shameless. At this time, the curtains of the next battle had already been drawn. The few of them were chatting with each other, and they were quite comfortable. After that, they found out that Linka, who was practicing at the same time as Reynold, had also won. In the afternoon, Reynold returned the favor by helping Irene. Linka was a passive person. He only had Reynold and Irene as friends in the academy, so he also came to watch the match. As expected, Aaron easily won the battle. Reynolds's luck finally took a turn for the better at night. He was matched against the 38th ranked rookie in the class. Irene, on the other hand, continued her good luck. 32nd, it seemed, would be no problem for her to advance to the next round. Chapter 441. The name of Reynolds, a dark horse that was blacker than ink, had already spread throughout the two great academies that night. Now everyone was discussing spiritedly. Who exactly was this guy that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere? Reynolds and Avina's relationship had improved a lot recently. Both of them were idiots, and it was their first time in love. They could talk about serious matters when they were together, but once they started talking about flirtatious topics, they started to feel awkward and didn't know what to do. As soon as he returned to the dormitory, Reynolds lay on his bed with a smug look on his face. Erin looked at him and found it funny. After chatting with him for a while, she went to sleep. The relationship between the roommates was also good. Reynolds was very satisfied with Erin as his roommate. The more he looked at her, the more pleasing she was to the eye. He often smiled at Erin. This made Erin's hair stand on end. She knew her roommate the best. He was perverted, cold, and flirty. This kind of Reynolds was actually very attentive to her recently. He brought her food, poured her water, and put his arm around her shoulders to go to class. Damn it, I feel like my body is no longer pure. Kakarin's thoughts ran wild with grief and anger. The next day, nothing changed. The competition was still exciting. Reynolds knew that he was already famous in the academy. In order to hide his strength, Reynolds didn't use his full strength. There was even a moment when he didn't use Li Bai's strength. Reynolds fought this match very easily. This time, his opponent was the 38th rookie in the Martial Arts Academy's low-level class. After knowing that his opponent was the one who defeated Washlaki, he was a little scared. He just wanted to not make a fool of himself, so he just passively defended. Therefore, the battle was one-sided. His opponent only knew how to hold on. Reynolds fought very boldly, changing his spiritual power weapon repeatedly as he pleased. Of course, this was not his true strength, so it didn't matter if it was exposed. There were still many spectators in the venue. They were not here for the others, but for the dark horse, Reynolds. Everyone was mesmerized by his performance. This person's spiritual energy wasn't too strong, or he was deliberately hiding it. This was something that everyone in the audience could see. However, he relied on his weak spiritual energy to suppress his opponent to the point that he couldn't fight back with his strange skills and strong self-confidence. People had always regarded spiritual power as the foundation of the foundation and the standard to judge whether someone was strong or weak. The students who were unable to participate because of their low quality and lack of spiritual power suddenly saw a new path to becoming strong. Originally, he could have won very quickly, but Reynolds purely treated this match as practice. Therefore, it was not until the 7th minute that the outcome of the match was decided. On the other hand, his opponent had already used up all 5 of his medicinal pills, and was about to collapse from exhaustion. However, he heaved a huge sigh of relief. Being able to hold on for such a long time, he already had enough face to enter the arena. Even though Reynolds was taught by Dean Randolph, he knew that he didn't have much combat experience. That was why he purposely went easy on Randolph when he was facing the last student in the class. This way, not only would he not expose his true strength, but he would also give face to the student who was fighting hard. Reynolds walked off the stage and waved at the cheering audience. He walked in front of Avina, looked around, and asked curiously, where did Shi-jun go? Little Lindsay, you won easily again. Avina was very happy at first, then she said, Shi-jun, he's also competing. It should be over soon, right? I see. Renaud muttered, seriously, what else could be more important than our brotherly relationship of taking a dragon and tiger bath together? Erin, who had just arrived behind the two, was so embarrassed that she wanted to die. She sighed and said, Reynolds, don't always talk about that kind of thing in public. It's so embarrassing. Reynolds patted Erin's shoulder and smiled. Shi-jun, I thought you were secretly picking up girls in the academy and abandoning me to cheer for her. Erin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How could I pick up girls? Of course, I'd have to be a lesbian. But this guy has been hanging out with Avina every day. Without Reynolds in the dorm, she was starting to feel bored. Thinking of this, Erin looked at Reynolds with a bit of bitterness. Reynolds was creeped out by her stare and had goosebumps all over his body. He wondered if this handsome and effeminate roommate of his had a homosexual fetish and was admiring him after seeing his heroic performance just now. He quickly drew a line and said, Brother, I'll make it clear first. I'm a normal man both physically and mentally. Please don't fall in love with me. Finding someone else is fine. After all, it's a personal interest. I'm not so old-fashioned. We'll still be friends. Erin interrupted him. Ba, you're the one who's dirty. I'm also a normal woman, both physically and mentally. Reynolds was startled. Woman what? Erin quickly said, I'm a woman lover. Reynolds clicked his tongue in praise. Not bad, Shi-jun. You even know how to use such a special term. You've improved a lot. Erin wiped away the cold sweat on her forehead. She had almost exposed her identity. It seemed she had to be careful with her words. After saying this, Reynolds was startled. He was really used to saying such things. How did he end up talking about Avina? Reynolds was just about to explain when he saw Avina roll her eyes at him and walk away alone. Reynolds saw this and quickly chased after her. In the next few days, the knockout matches were still in full swing. Reynolds's luck was neither bad nor bad. He did not meet any opponents that were too bad, but he also did not draw anyone stronger than Washlaki, who ranked 6th in the admission test. Most of the time, he was able to win without much trouble. Reynolds's reputation in the 2 academies was growing. It was not because of how strong Reynolds was, but because he relied on his strange and varied skills to defeat opponents with stronger spiritual power. Those who were defeated by Reynolds were all very depressed. It was as if they were holding a machete, but they were stabbed to death by a guy who used an embroidery needle. This was a very embarrassing thing that made them want to vomit blood. In fact, it was not like that. It was just that Reynolds's strength was too strong. Even if he hid his strength, others would not notice it. This kind of unreasonable way of winning was too eye-catching, especially for the weak. It was fun to watch an expert trample on a newbie, but it was even more fun to watch the weak win against the strong. Due to this characteristic of human nature, the number of spectators in the arena where Reynolds appeared skyrocketed. Every arena was packed to the brim. Everyone wanted to know how bad this dark horse could be. Reynolds was so popular that he even overshadowed several strong contenders for the championship in the 2 academies. Reynolds, who was the idol of many newbies, finally felt the trouble of being famous. Now, whenever he appeared in the academies, there was a high chance that his fans would come up to him and say a lot of words of admiration and advice. Chapter 442. At first, Reynolds thought it was a great honor, but the more he heard these words, the more he felt it was mushy. Now he had no choice but to wear the hermit cloak when he went out, or he would be annoyed to death. Aaron and Ham also advanced smoothly without any major threat. On the other hand, Lin Ling would often appear in Reynolds's dormitory. While encouraging him, she would also remind him not to be careless from time to time. After the baptism of the competition, Lin Ling's confidence in Reynolds grew day by day. This was because every battle he fought was always surprising. He seemed to be improving every day, invisible but fast. Lin Ling was very happy. Her judgment was right. After winning another match, Reynolds suggested that they go to a high-class restaurant for a good meal. Aaron had no objections, and they hit it off. She was exhausted from all the competition these days. No matter what, she had to replenish her energy. Lin Ling was also there. The two academies were on vacation during the competition, so they could go back and forth freely. At first, Lin Ling ran to Reynolds's dorm all day. Since the dorm was big and there were many rooms, she decided to stay in his dorm. The three of them also called Ham to see if he was interested in having dinner with them. Aaron felt very awkward being forced to wear the hermit cloak with Reynolds every time they went out. She joked, "Reynolds, you're a big celebrity in the academy now. Just a casual shout and I'm afraid there will be many young ladies crying and shouting as they throw themselves at you, thirsting for your comfort." With Lin Ling around, Reynolds naturally couldn't discuss women with his roommates. He coughed and said, "It's fine as long as I have Lin Ling. Those women are just a pile of shit in my eyes." Aaron almost vomited when she heard that. She used to see him standing by the window of the dormitory, staring at the female students passing by below with interest. Now he was acting all serious, but it was enough to see that he had special feelings for Lin Ling. Lin Ling was very happy to hear this. She held Reynolds's arm tighter. "Little Lin is still the best." She then pinched Reynolds's soft flesh with all her strength. Reynolds grimaced in pain. Aaron didn't want to expose Reynolds's pretense and leave a bad impression on Lin Ling. Besides, it was useless no matter what she said. From their daily behavior, it was obvious that their relationship was quite good. As they chatted and laughed, they quickly arrived at Ham's dormitory. However, they heard Ham's painful moans and the curses of others when they arrived at the dormitory villa. "Stinking brat, you think you can act all high and mighty just because you can last a little longer in the knockout round? How dare you talk back to me?" This voice wasn't completely unfamiliar to them. They had even had a conflict before. It was the fat assassin Leopold, whom Reynolds and the others had met in the Academy's high-class restaurant for the first time, and a few of his friends who were similar to him. Ham was indeed a very strange person. His qualities were considered very high in the low-level warrior class, and he was more hard-working than anyone else. He was full of courage and ferocity on the battlefield, but once he was off the stage, he became dull and honest, even as timid as a mouse. He was often bullied by others, but he didn't dare to put up any resistance. Aaron hated the fatty to begin with. Seeing the situation, she immediately rushed forward to help. With the strength of these people, any one of them could easily take care of all of them. However, Reynolds pulled her back and said, "Wait, don't go over." Aaron was puzzled. "Why? Reynolds, are we just going to stand by and watch? That's too immoral, isn't it?" Reynolds sighed and said, "When a person falls, what we need to do is not to help him up, but to let him get up on his own. Otherwise, he won't be able to get up the next time he falls." Reynolds was deeply moved. He had fallen down before, and it was even worse than Ham's. However, he had already crawled up and was standing steadily. Erin didn't fully understand the profound philosophies of Earth, but she vaguely felt that her roommate's words did make some sense. So, she didn't act rashly and waited to see what would happen. Stinking brat, you've eaten a leopard's guts. Leopold was especially angry today because he had been dumped by the campus bus Doris not long ago. That woman was a promiscuous slut to begin with. This was something the whole school knew. Most of the men who had an affair with her would just go their separate ways after playing with each other. However, Leopold just so happened to be a little innocent. Or perhaps he was infatuated with Doris's sexy body. After being a bus passenger for a while, he really thought he was the driver and wanted to use the bus as a private car. The consequences were obvious. A woman as fickle as Doris wouldn't give up the whole forest for a tree. Soon, she hooked up with another pretty boy. That guy's family was quite influential. Leopold knew he couldn't afford to offend them, so he could only vent his anger on others. Today, he suddenly felt depressed again. When he asked his friends out to look for unlucky people to bully, he just happened to run into Ham on the way. Leopold still had some impression of this pushover, who had almost pissed his pants a month or two ago. So, he immediately went up to provoke him. Ham also said a few words like, "Seniors, please let me go." He was a person who was afraid of trouble, but as long as he didn't cause any trouble, he didn't dare talk back. However, Leopold was in a fit of anger and was deliberately looking for trouble. No matter how much Ham bowed, it was useless. He was immediately beaten up by a group of people. He could only cover his head with his hands and beg for mercy. Seeing this, Leopold felt a wave of pleasure. The depression of being dumped also disappeared a lot. He said even more excitedly, "Beat him up! Beat him up!" Seeing Ham lying on the ground, beaten up by a few people and bleeding from his head, Erin couldn't stand it anymore. "Reynolds, are we really going to do this?" Reynolds seemed to have a heart of stone. "Yes, there are some things we can't help with." When he was on Earth, he lost a lot and gained a lot. He knew that when he came to King's Land, the only favor he owed others was to eat and drink for free at Luoyu Bar. But later, Reynolds also gave Skak a large sum of money, so Reynolds didn't feel that he had lost anything. And if Ham continued like this, then he would forever be ashamed of his commoner parents who spent their life savings to send him to school, hoping that he would make a name for himself. Until the few people got tired of beating him up and left while cursing, the situation that Reynolds hoped for still didn't happen. Ham was too honest, so honest that he didn't even have the slightest consciousness of resistance. Only then did Reynolds and the other two walk out from the darkness. Erin asked with concern, "Ham, are you okay?" Ham felt very embarrassed to be seen by his friends like this. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and got up from the ground. I'm fine, just a flesh wound." Chapter 443. Renaud turned around. "That's good. Shijun, Erin, let's go." Erin was stunned. Then Ham, walking in front of Ham, Renaud said coldly, "Brother Ham, you still lack courage. If you continue like this, you'll only be a coward for the rest of your life. Are you sure you want to continue like this? Have you ever thought about your parents who want you to be successful will be heartbroken if they see their son like this?" In truth, he had enough strength to resist. Fatty and the others might not even be his match, but he didn't dare. If Ham was such a coward, Renaud didn't think there was any need for him to continue being friends with him. Erin was still hesitating, but Renaud had already left. Erin naturally followed him. Erin stomped her feet and followed. Ham watched his only two friends leave in a daze for a long time. Suddenly, he burst into tears and hammered the ground. "No. I'm not a coward. I'm not a coward." The knockout round mercilessly filtered out the weak, who were not strong enough to become one of the spectators below the stage. However, there were also strong fellows who were unlucky enough to be excluded. This was a matter of luck. For example, The martial arts academies would element magic warrior Vashlaki, the witch arts academies Bearman berserker Kandongli, and the knight Pu-yi. These people weren't weak. Unfortunately, they had run into people stronger than them. In this year's elimination tournament, there were many situations where the strong met on a narrow path. There were so many positions, but they still drew opponents. This was a rare occurrence in the past. Because there were many strong people participating in the elimination tournament, those who were slightly weaker were naturally secretly happy. There were fewer obstacles on the road to fame, so they didn't have to walk so rugged. In addition, there was something even more strange. The number of lower classes that passed this year's elimination tournament was much higher than before. Of course, this had to take into account the Academy's reform of increasing the number of participants. However, many of the lower classes had defeated the higher-ranked students. This was very rare. In the past, it was already the limit for the top 2 or 3 of the lower classes to compete with the higher-ranked students. Thus, many people suspected that the lower classes had all taken drugs to participate in the tournament. Their luck was so good that they dragged down so many of the higher classes. When there were only 1,000 survivors left in each grade, the Academy tournament entered a new schedule, the finals. Renaud was a dark horse that could surprise people all day long. It was expected that he would be able to enter the finals, and his 2 companions had also successfully advanced. Lin Ka was still as ferocious as a tiger on the stage. She was even crazier than before. No one knew if she was stimulated by what had happened that day. With his oppressive aura, he even defeated an assassin who was much stronger than him. Reynolds began to wonder if Hlinka had mistaken his opponent for Leopold when he was present. It was different from the large number of people in the knockout round, which was spread across nearly 100 training grounds of the 2 academies at the same time. The finals were divided into 5 arenas according to the grade, and the number of people that could be accommodated in these 5 arenas was astonishing. Apart from the teachers and students of the 2 schools, there were also many important figures from all sides of society, the upper echelons of the human resources department of the guilds, famous nobles, and other guests who might come from afar and appear in the stands. They might be looking for the talents they needed, or showing concern for the growth of the new heroes, or even people who were trying to curry favor with the culture. The fateful duel between the Martial Arts Academy and the Demonic Academy was considered a rare event in the Great Tang, and there was a reason for it. Apart from the fame of the 2 academies and the large number of people in the Great Tang, it also attracted a large number of people from the upper echelons of the Great Tang. In the first round of the finals, the opponents were still decided by drawing lots, but the opponents were no longer limited to the same specialization. They could be people from any specialization in the same grade. Renaud's opponent was an archer. Magic warrior was a very diverse specialization. There were magic warriors, magic knights, magic thieves, magic hunters, magic assassins. Apart from magicians and some other special combat specializations, basically all the other specializations were included. Of course, this included archers, so Renaud didn't care. Yuji's opponent was a magician. He could be considered unlucky to have met the genius female magician who was famous throughout the Great Tang. Even if Yuji couldn't show her full strength due to her identity, with her deep understanding of the various magic elements, it would be difficult for the magician to gain any advantage in terms of attack. It could be said that there was only a slim chance of survival. No, there was no chance of survival. Also, Linka's opponent was an assassin. Renaud felt that this assassin was also unlucky because of Linka's inexplicable but deeply suppressed hatred for Leopold. However, Renaud didn't have the time to think too much about the matter of these 2 friends, because he had placed all his attention on another extremely important battle, Aaron's debut battle, which was also the opening battle of the freshmen's finals. Renaud was very clear about Aaron's strength. She was very powerful, and after Rudolph's guidance, Aaron was able to fight him with ease. Of course, Renaud wasn't willing to use his full strength. Therefore, Renaud was very relieved. The venue of the finals was not just lively. It was even more lively than the Olympic Games on Earth. The atmosphere could be described as crazy. The clamor was like a tsunami, and the countless black heads could make people so nervous that they could not control themselves. This was especially true for the rookies who had participated in the finals for the first time and had never seen such a big scene before. In addition, the various experts and important figures in the VIP seats would also bring about an invisible psychological pressure. There were countless people who were slightly famous in Tang Dynasty, and they could be seen everywhere. The test for the participants of such a grand event was undoubtedly harsh. However, the real talents had to be able to withstand the pressure that ordinary people couldn't. During the invasion of the demonic beasts and the war on the continent, unexpected situations could occur at any time. When the clouds of death and despair wrapped around a person, whether or not he could withstand the pressure was an important question that concerned his or her life. Erin was clearly not used to this kind of stage, and she was a little uncomfortable at the moment. Renaud held Erin's small hand tightly and smiled. "Linger, don't worry. Believe in yourself. You can do it." Erin immediately felt relieved when she saw Renaud's smile. It was as if there was nothing she couldn't do with Renaud by her side. "I heard that the famous singer of Tang Dynasty, Miss Painted Heart, will also be here. Haha, I wonder if the songs in this world are good." Renaud muttered to himself. At this moment, the venue suddenly darkened. The transparent barrier at the outermost layer had materialized and blocked the light. All kinds of flames rose from the surroundings of the venue and burned fiercely, adding a bit of a mysterious atmosphere to the finals. The people of King's Mainland weren't too old-fashioned. They still knew how to create momentum. This martial arts venue was a bit like the concert venue of a singer on Earth. Chapter 444. A beautiful MC dressed to the nines walked gracefully onto the stage, and the noisy crowd quieted down. The beautiful MC was obviously very excited to be the MC of this event. Her crisp voice was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears through the sound wave loudspeaker. Today is an exciting and special day in Chang'an, as well as the annual grand event of the Tang Empire. The finals of the Academy tournament held by the two famous academies under Randolph will officially begin here. I am honored to represent the teachers and students of the two academies to express my heartfelt welcome and sincere blessings to the distinguished guests who have come from afar. Today's guests include the #1 archer of the Tang Empire, Mr. Gandalf, the Vice President of the Tang Empire's Magician Guild, Mr. Johann, the Vice President of the Tang Empire's Magician Guild, Mr. Matthew, the President of the Magician Guild, Ms. Angelina, the Prime Minister of Chang, and Mr. Shangguan, High Priest Edward. The beautiful MC's cherry lips continuously spat out a bunch of names. Without exception, these people were all famous figures. If all of them stomped their feet at the same time, the entire Tang Empire would probably shake a few times. Even the host, Castellan Leo, and the representative of the Holy Faith, High Priest Edward, could only be ranked 5th. Only 6 people were introduced, and there were even saint-level powerhouses. The significance of this grand event was obvious. Victoria City's guardian hero, Mr. Bright Controller Fred, and the president of the Sanctuary Guild, Mr. Bossman. Hearing these names, Reynolds immediately said to the people around him, I remember him. He is the father of the rebellious genius magician, UG, whose whereabouts are still unknown. TSK, this UG is really something. Instead of being a lady, she ran away from home. Speaking of which, the upbringing of this guild is really bad. If I were him, I would definitely beat my daughter up after bringing her home. I guarantee that she won't dare to run away again. UG heard this and glared at Reynolds fiercely. She thought to herself, no matter how good I am, I can't compare to you. Who in the family doesn't treat me like a treasure? They don't even dare to reprimand me, let alone beat my ass where? The others were also dumbfounded. It was rare to see someone so bold as to attack the daughter of the Sanctuary Guild and the head of the Bossman family in such a big city. Seeing his roommate's excited reaction, Reynolds immediately remembered the strange scene when they saw Yuji's picture in the magic mirror when they were traveling in Chang'an City last time. He quickly changed the topic and said, I'm sorry, Shijun. I almost forgot. That unruly. Oh no, that angel-like gentle and beautiful Miss Yuji is your dream lover. I'm sorry. Yuji didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She liked Yuji. Narcissism? However, when Yuji saw the old man coming to the venue, she felt a little uneasy. When it came to her competition, she must not let him see through her. If it was anyone else, Yuji was confident that she wouldn't expose her identity. However, that person wasn't anyone else. He was Yuji's father, someone who had watched her grow up. After the earth-shattering names were introduced one by one, what followed was undoubtedly an earth-shattering applause, which lasted for nearly 5 minutes before gradually subsiding. The beautiful host said, "Next, let's welcome the representatives of the tournament, the 2 deans of the Martial Arts Academy and the Demon Academy, as well as the famous Saint Realm warriors, Ms. Angela and Mr. Randolph, to come up and speak." Angela. Hearing this name, Reynolds and Aline looked at each other and then looked at the stage at the same time. Under the warm applause, the 2 presidents slowly walked onto the stage. Reynolds saw Angela's elegance. She was a cute little loli with 2 red ponytails. She had an elegant demeanor. Reynolds sighed. They were both deans, but why did Randolph look like a pig being slaughtered? Reynolds and Aaron calmed down when they saw Angela's face. The 2 deans walked to the center of the stage almost at the same time. Randolph's dull face was full of smiles, and he looked very gentlemanly. Then, he warmly greeted his old friend, "Old witch, don't think that your academy will win this competition so easily. Wahahaha." His first sentence scared at least half of the rookies from the 2 academies. "Randolph, you are still so energetic. You are almost like a young man." Angela's smile didn't change, but there was a hidden meaning in her words. She was implying that Randolph was impulsive and impulsive. Randolph snorted and said, "I'm a straightforward person. It's better than people who are always scheming." Angela said slowly, "No matter what we do, the best way is to spend the least amount of effort and finish it in the shortest amount of time. It's very stupid to act recklessly without thinking." When the 2 met, their personalities were very different. Angela liked to use schemes and was very cunning. Of course, Randolph called it a scheme. Randolph, on the other hand, was brave and good at fighting. However, in Angela's eyes, Randolph was like a bull. Their differing personalities caused their fighting philosophies to be completely different, causing the 2 of them to quarrel endlessly without end. Even in such a grand occasion of the entire city, and even the entire empire, they had to verbally attack each other first. The 2 respected deans didn't look like powerful people or leaders at all. One of them was like a hooligan on the street and the other was like a cute old witch. They didn't want to give in to each other. The new students were dumbfounded, while the old students and the guests who had been to the tournament many times were already used to it. If these 2 fated deans did not engage in a war of words before the opening match, they would have thought that the sun had risen from the west. After Angela and Randolph had trampled on their image as powerful warriors, they finally got to the main topic. They greeted the guests cooperatively and talked about the meaning of this competition. After that, they walked off the stage in opposite directions. Finally, they walked off the stage in opposite directions like strangers. The next person to walk onto the stage wasn't the host. Instead, it was a beautiful woman with long wavy olive hair. She was slim, and she walked to the center of the stage lightly. The flames that were burning in the air were greatly reduced, and the stage was a lot darker. She looked even more elegant and graceful, like an angel who didn't touch the mortal world. Chapter 445. There was another wave of uncontrollable cheers from the stands. The male students were particularly loud because she was Hua Xian, the singer who was extremely popular in Chang'an. She was a public figure that everyone, be it commoners or aristocrats, liked. Under the effect of the sound wave diffuser, Hua Xian's unique voice was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. I am very honored to be able to participate in the opening ceremony of the inter-school competition jointly organized by the Chang, an Academy's Martial Arts Academy, and the Academy of Witchcraft. Hua Xian is here to present a song. I hope that the glory of the god of war, Patadora, can be bathed in the body of every young warrior. You will be the hope of the Tang Empire tomorrow. As a top figure among the female elves, Hua Xian's voice contained an invisible yet substantial mysterious power. With just a few words, she had stirred up the blood of these new students. They couldn't wait to go on stage and perform immediately to prove that they indeed had the power to contribute greatly to the Tang Empire. In the midst of the dance, Hua Xian's singing voice had already started, echoing throughout the venue. The melodious and lingering tune made everyone think of the scene of a young girl leaning against the window and singing softly, eagerly waiting for her lover to return from the battlefield. She was proud of her lover, proud, worried, anxious, and all sorts of other complicated feelings intertwined and were displayed in front of everyone through her voice. The anticipation of a lover was a silent but powerful force. Driven by it, the young heroes who only wanted to destroy the magical beasts as soon as possible and reunite with their loved ones would thus unleash their greatest potential and contribute more strength to the defense of the city. This kind of invisible hypnosis effect was sharp and effective. Therefore, hypnotists would become an essential and important force on the battlefield. Other than collectively weakening the imposing manner of the magical beasts, they could also raise the fighting spirit of the warriors on their side. As the tune changed, the gentle and lingering tune in Hua Xian's voice faded and was replaced by a vigorous and passionate spirit. Her elegant dancing posture also gradually became wilder. Her beautiful hair fluttered in the wind. Her slender arms and slender legs, together with her waist, twisted in a soul-stirring manner. It was as if she wanted to release all the heat energy in every cell in her body. The beat of the tune gradually tightened, like the loud beating of drums on the battlefield. The warriors' fighting spirit soared amidst the sound of the drums. The moment they stepped onto the battlefield valiantly and with high spirits was like a tangible image that was deeply engraved in everyone's mind. It was difficult to erase it. This was the song of a hero. In order to protect one's homeland, one could lay down one's head, shed one's blood, and advance courageously. Painted Heart ingeniously turned the tenderness of children and the boldness of heroes into seeds of spiritual power, deeply implanting them in the hearts of these rookies. They would slowly germinate until they blossomed and bore fruit. That was the time when the rookies became heroes who protected the country. Everyone present was completely immersed in her heavenly voice, as if they were intoxicated, as if they were collectively hypnotized. Only Reynolds was able to keep his head clear. This was because the vocation on earth was very popular. He had heard countless good songs that came from his heart, so he had a certain level of immunity. However, the charm of the Painted Heart was indeed irresistible. Reynolds's blood was also surging, and it was hard to suppress. When everyone came back to their senses from their daze, they realized that the song had already stopped, and Painted Heart had left the stage at some point. Good. Miss Hua Xian's song is really wonderful. I've heard of it for a long time. Today, I finally have the pleasure of hearing it. The #1 archer of the Tang Empire, Gandalf, was the first to stand up and applaud Painted Heart's wonderful performance. He was the guest with the highest status and the most qualifications to speak. The others also stood up together, and the applause was thunderous, almost breaking the enchantment of the venue. Reynolds was filled with emotions as he watched from below the stage, but not because of Painted Heart's singing. Instead, he thought of his own Earth. On Earth, he had also seen a concert by a certain heavenly king with the surname Zhou. After coming to this world, he didn't even have the chance to listen to music. Irene looked at Reynolds's expression and seemed to understand his thoughts. At this time, she held his hand tightly. Before the momentum of the song died down, the host announced that the battle was about to begin. Irene was also filled with confidence at this time. She said to Reynolds, "Little Lin, I will definitely win." Reynolds smiled and said, "I believe in Ling. Go." Irene's first battle wasn't as difficult as she thought it would be. In terms of strength, her opponent was much weaker than her. Also, he was a barbarian warrior who wasn't good at long-range attack. After being entangled by Irene's flexible water elemental puppets, he couldn't even use his brute force. He was defeated before he could even touch Irene's clothes. He admitted defeat because he couldn't even move. If he continued to fight, he would only become a free sandbag for the other powerful water elemental puppets. While Reynolds and the others were celebrating Irene's victory, Randolph and Angela were sitting on the stage in the distance. "Hey, old man!" Randolph was angry when he heard Angela calling him that. He said, "What's wrong, old witch? Do you want to fight?" Surprisingly, Angela didn't get angry. She just sighed and said, "Randolph, let's get down to business. What do you think of the kids named Reynolds and Irene?" Randolph thought for a while and said, "They are talented. Heroes come from young. They are two good seeds." Angela paused for a second and said, "You think so too." The first day of the finals ended, and it was the weekend. Due to the tight schedule, the contestants were under a lot of pressure. Therefore, the school still had a holiday to let the contestants have a good rest. Reynolds was the same as usual. In the next match, he drew Meredith, who was regarded as the most likely contender for the champion of the Demonic Paths freshmen. She had the nickname of Female Tyrannosaurus, the human berserker Meredith. But this was not the most important thing. What made him depressed was Leon's battle today. Dark spiritual energy was the nemesis of any elemental spiritual energy. Only the light element was the absolute nemesis of dark spiritual energy. All other elements would be greatly suppressed by dark spiritual energy. As for Knight Leon, who was the ruler of darkness, he was able to fully utilize the advantages of his dark spiritual energy. His opponent, the Hunter Spencer, was a famous figure in the martial arts academy. He was skilled in earth element spiritual energy, and could even use solid armor. Both his attack and defense were top-notch. However, he was suppressed by Leon and lost miserably on the spot. Spencer's skills made Leon's defense impenetrable. He couldn't even touch a finger of Leon's. This was very disappointing. If Leon was a reckless person, he could at least take advantage of the flaws. However, Leon was as careful as a fox. Reynolds could tell that with Leon's level, there was a 99% chance that he would lose. Also, Leon would graduate from Randolph Academy in 1 year. With his powerful strength and family background, he would be able to become a general in the army. Chapter 446. If there was a chance to fight him, then he would be considered an official opponent. However, he was a fifth-year student after all. It was impossible for him to fight a first-year student. After all, the rules did not allow it. But even if he was such a character, how would he compare to the heroes he had met? The second round of the freshman finals was about to be a climactic battle. On one side was the dark horse Reynolds, darker than ink, and on the other side was Meredith, known as the female T-Rex. The female T-Rex, Berserker Meredith, was actually not as ugly as a T-Rex. In fact, she was quite a pretty female student, full of masculine and wild beauty. When Reynolds first saw Meredith, he felt that she was very much like the overbearing flowers on Earth. They were both powerful women who did not lose out to men. Meredith's personality was very fiery, and she was a berserker who was good at increasing her strength and defense in an instant. Therefore, she was often more violent than her opponent when fighting with men. She liked to fight with force, like a storm of crazy attacks, almost ignoring defense. Men were naturally prideful. If they were defeated by gorgeous magic or clever skills, then so be it. But if they were defeated by a woman in a head-on battle, then they would lose all face and their self-esteem would be greatly hurt. Therefore, Meredith had the elegant nickname of Female T-Rex. When Meredith found out that her opponent was Reynolds, she immediately focused her attention on the battle. She also wanted to see how powerful this so-called dark horse, who hid his strength, was. Reynolds had a bold idea. He could not stand girls being so strong, and also could not stand girls being so manly. Moreover, this girl was quite pretty. So Reynolds decided to use some effective methods to help this Meredith become more feminine. Reynolds and Meredith stood on the stage, looking at each other. Meredith was the first to lose her cool and said, "Reynolds, I have heard of your reputation. Today, I want to experience it." Reynolds sighed and thought to himself, is it really good for a girl to be so manly? Isn't she worried that she won't be able to marry? Thinking of this, Reynolds was too lazy to speak. A plan came to his mind, and his eyes could not help but size up Meredith's body. Meredith was shocked. When she realized that Reynolds's eyes had been on her body a few times, she reacted and could not help but yell, "Reynolds, die!" After saying this, she rushed towards Reynolds with her weapon. She felt that Reynolds's gaze was really vicious. Meredith suspected that if they weren't in public, he would have pounced on her at any time, pressed her to the ground, and raped her 100 times. The thought made her hair stand on end. After a few rounds, his moves were really too shameless. For example, his hands were always greeting her full breasts. Although Meredith's personality had deviated from the normal path and was somewhat masculine, she was still a woman and still valued her feminine pride very much. If she was hit by that punch, she would probably be flattened like an airport runway. Even the priests would not be able to heal her. She would cry herself to death if that happened. The ones above were still all right, but the one that made her want to vomit blood the most was when she launched a fierce attack, forcing him to the point where he almost revealed a flaw. This Reynolds would use his spiritual energy to conjure a long popsicle and attack her lower body. In this way, Meredith could no longer ignore defense like before and put all her energy into defense. That place was a woman's vital part, and no matter how strong her defense was, it would be useless. If she was careless and let the sword pierce in, the duel would become a live broadcast of an adult film. Meredith regretted underestimating Reynolds's vulgarity, or else she would have definitely made a set of metal underwear beforehand. Almost all the female students in the audience were cursing in their hearts, "Beast," and the male students who watched Reynolds fight for the glory of their male compatriots were carefree and happy. Wonderful, really wonderful, there was actually such a brilliant way to break it. Especially those who had been violently defeated by Meredith in the competition and whose young hearts had been greatly traumatized. They wished they could just shout, "Fight her head on! Fight her head on! Student Reynolds, we support you unconditionally!" Even Eugene felt ashamed for her roommate, and considered whether or not she should pretend not to know him when he came down later. Some of the strong people in the audience nodded, some shook their heads. They were all people who knew what was good for them. Reynolds had very accurately grasped his opponent's weakness, and used the least amount of spiritual energy to resolve fierce attacks, getting through crisis after crisis. This was something they had to admit. But this move was really a bit too ungentlemanly. Those who were more moral felt that he was really too shameless, while those who were more flexible felt that it was very clever. And in war, no one cared what methods you used, as long as you could defeat them, then you were a hero. Meredith could only rely on those few pills to barely resist Reynolds's attack. She was originally a woman who did not scheme, and her opponent's tricky attacks were so hard to guard against. She repeatedly took them all, and after running out of ammunition and food. Meredith knew that she had no chance of winning, and could only admit defeat. After the referee announced the result of the match, Reynolds gracefully cupped his hands and said, "Meredith, thank you for letting me win." Meredith was not so polite, and used all her remaining strength to fiercely throw the big axe in her hand to the ground, smashing a big hole. She was extremely dissatisfied with this extremely depressing defeat, and said angrily, "Good, Reynolds, I will always remember you, the most shameless person in the world." She did not even bother to give her blessings for her opponent's advancement, and directly left the stage without looking back. But she still had hope of advancing. The finals were different from the knockout round, and it was not a single round of elimination. Those who had lost in the same academy would have to continue fighting to fight for the last 5 spots in the second year's competition. This was a special rule set by the academy to effectively prevent outstanding students from fighting each other. Any side had the strength to enter the finals, but there would always be one side that had to be eliminated. Even if they lost, they still had one more chance. "Next time, if your temper is still so violent, I will train you even harder." Reynolds looked at Meredith's back and teased her. Meredith was stunned for a moment when she heard this, and then she quickened her pace. This action instantly won the support and cheers of the male students on the field. The applause from the audience was louder than any other battle. Reynolds was like a hero who had made an immortal achievement. Almost all the male students were enthusiastically calling out his name, while the boos from the female students were powerlessly drowned out by the applause. The winner was king, and the loser was a bandit. This was the rule of the game, and no one could change it. When Reynolds walked off the stage, a very wretched old man with a few tufts of a goatee from the VIP seats by the aisle came over to greet him. "Reynolds, well done! You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."